Hey, what's going on, guys? So I got a cool project for you today, and I'm excited about this one. It's not so much about the project itself, which is a support ticket system, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, but more so the tools that we're going to use and how to use them together. So as far as the tools, we're using Next.js, which is an SSR framework that uses React. We'll be using Neon, so we'll have a cloud Postgres database. Prisma, which is an ORM, so we'll use that to interact with our database and create models and migrations and stuff. And then I'd say the main focus of this video is going to be a tool called Sentry, which is an error monitoring and tracking tool, as well as performance monitoring. So the reason you use something like Sentry is because normally, you have your website or your application, your users are going to it, and it's just inevitable that you're going to have bugs. You're going to have issues. Your users are going to run into issues, and they may or may not tell you about them. And it could go days, weeks, months without you even knowing that these problems are happening and turning away your users. So what Sentry does is it gives you this main dashboard, this centralized location where you have all the events that happen in your website. You can log as many events as you want. And of course, your errors. You're going to see all your errors that take priority, as well as your just custom logs. And this will allow you to pinpoint issues. So especially if you can't replicate them yourself, you can get email notifications when your users run into issues. And you're going to have all the information that's available as far as the stack trace goes, as far as your user information. And then you also have a screen recording of what the user was doing, what happened on screen when that error happened, which can help you, debug. So it's going to help you not only find errors and know about errors, but also debug them. And this is something that you would use in a production project. It's something, often you'll use when you're working for a large company. So it's really valuable to know how to use this stuff. So I'll show you how to use that. We're going to get set up with the Sentry Wizard and the SDK for Next.js. And then we're also going to be using or building a custom authentication system rather than using something like NextAuth, which is great, but I wanted to do something a little lower level for this project. So we'll be using a package called Jose that will just generate JSON web tokens for us. And we'll be hooking up, the login, the register, the logout, managing sessions, etc. And then as far as the project itself, we'll be able to, log in and create tickets. So support tickets where we can describe an issue. And then you'll be able to, obviously see a list of the tickets, see the details view. You'll be able to close the ticket, delete the ticket. So it's pretty simple as far as functionality, but again, this isn't about the project itself. It's about learning how to use these tools so that you can build your own projects with them. All right, so grab a coffee, grab a tea. I really suggest that you follow along, and let's get into it. All right, guys, so I'm really excited for this project. I think you're really going to like it. And again, I would suggest that you follow along with me, write the code with me, and I think that that's just the best learning experience you can get. So I'm going to just go through the phases so you have a high-level view of the tasks and how we'll be doing this, the order of functionality that we'll be creating. So there's 4 phases. The first one is going to be setting up Sentry and our database. Okay, we're using a Neon Postgres database. So number 1, we'll get our Next app up and going. So create Next app, very simple. You guys know that, most of you. Number 2, we'll set up Sentry, which is really simple. There's something called the Sentry Wizard that we can run with npx, and it gives us a sample error that we can fire off. So we can go into the Sentry dashboard and kind of see how it works, see what it gives us, and then from there we can integrate it into all of the different functions throughout our application. Then we're going to set up our Neon database, which is very simple, just a couple clicks. Add the database URL to our environment variables. And then for Prisma and Neon adapter setup, so Prisma is the ORM that we're using. We're going to interact with the database using that. And the Neon adapter, we're going to use that to basically enable us to use Prisma and Neon together. Neon offers serverless Postgres databases, so there's just a couple extra steps we need to take, especially if you're going to deploy to Vercel. And then number 5, database ticket schema and migration. So we're going to start off with no authentication, no users. I just want to get the ticketing system working, which is, submitting the ticket and getting the tickets and so on. And what we do with Prisma is we create a schema, which is all the different fields that we want, like the ticket, the priority or the title, things like that, the date. So we set up a schema and then we run a migration with Prisma, and that will create our database tables in our Neon database. Okay, so that's phase 1. Phase 2, we have some basic UI stuff, and I also want to handle creating new tickets. Okay, so we'll set up Tailwind really, really easy with version 4 in Next.js. And then we'll create the welcome screen, which will just be a landing page with a couple buttons to submit a ticket or view your tickets. And then from there, we'll create the ticket form. Okay, we're going to be using Next.js or actions, so server actions, which you can use in place of API routes from older versions of Next.js. So basically, our form will submit to a server action, and then from there, we can do all of our database tasks using Prisma. All right, and we're going to be using a hook in the form called useActionState, which allows us to manage that form state with what comes back from the action. So it's the most modern way of doing this with Next.js. And of course, we're going to have our Sentry integration in the ticket flow. So we'll create a custom log event function we can use that fires off a couple different Sentry methods. We want to test it and check the Sentry reporting, look at any playbacks, etc. So that's phase 2, just being able to submit new tickets. And then phase 3 will be the ticket display. So we'll have an action, once again, a server action that will fetch the tickets from the database using Prisma. We'll have the tickets index page, which will list them all, the details page, which will list a single ticket, and then we'll have our Sentry reporting and tracking, and just some UI element styling, like if it's a serious priority, we'll make it red or whatever, just little things like that. We'll also have like toast notifications. And then the final phase, phase 4, is users and authentication, because up to this point, we can just create tickets and see them. But we want to be able to log in, right? And we want to be able to see only that user's tickets. So we'll start off with just creating a simple Navbar component with a login and register link. We want to create a new user schema, because obviously when you have authentication, you need somewhere to store your users. We'll have a custom authentication flow with JSON Web Tokens. We're going to be using a package called Jose, which is kind of a more modern version of the JSON Web Token package. We're going to create some low-level functions like encrypt and decrypt to deal with our token and deal with cookies, saving our token in a cookie, an HTTP-only cookie. And then high-level functions like register user, login user, these will be called from our actual components. And then the authorization, of course, you want to have a relationship between the tickets and your users so that the user can only see their own tickets and not everybody else's. So that's kind of the entire flow of this project, just so you can have an idea. So let's go ahead and jump into it, and let's start to create our next app. Okay, so we went over the kind of the workflow, the order that we're going to do things. So I'm assuming that most of you have at least a little experience with Next.js. If not, that's okay. But what I would really suggest is you at least know the basics of React. If you don't know anything about React, then you could watch my React crash course or just any kind of beginner React content just to get familiar with state, props, components, things like that. All right, so let's jump into it. I'm going to just open my terminal, navigate to where I want to create this project, and then we're going to run npx, and we want to do create-next app at latest, and then I'm going to call this project quick-ticket. Now, as far as using TypeScript, I'm going to use it, but if you don't want to, you can say no. There's not a ton of TypeScript we're going to write, so you'll be fine even if you've never used it before, and you click yes. ESLint will click yes. Tailwind, I'm going to use it. Using the source directory. App router, yes. TurboPack for NextDev, I'm going to say no, and customize the import alias, I'll say no to that as well. All right, so that's going to go ahead and install all these dependencies and just scaffold up a Next.js application for us. So now that that's done, let's cd into quick ticket, And then from here, there's a couple other dependencies I want to install. So Prisma, we want the Prisma client, which is at Prisma/client. We're also using React-icons. There's some other things later, but this is all I want to install at the moment. And then I want to, once we get the dev server up and running, we'll start to integrate Sentry as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and open this folder in Visual Studio Code or whatever text editor you want to use. I'm going to be using the integrated terminal, so I'll close that up and then open the integrated terminal. And we can go ahead and run npm run dev. And let's see, I want to open that here. So let's go, it's going to be localhost 3000. And we should just see the default Next.js page. And we can do a little bit of cleanup here. So in the source folder, we have our app folder. And you may have chosen not to use a source folder. That's fine. Your app folder will just be in your root. And from here, the page.tsx is the home page. And if you're new to Next.js, it uses file-based routing. So the app folder is like your routing folder, where the page.tsx that's directly in it is your home page. If you wanted, let's say, /about, you would create an about folder with a page.tsx in that about folder, and that would just show up at /about. And all the pages are React components. In fact, we're going to wipe away this one, the page.tsx. I'm going to generate a component with the React Simple Snippets extension that I have, so SFC, enter or tab, and then it just scaffolds out a component. I like to use the arrow function syntax with the export at the bottom, but there's other, formats as well. And then for now, let's just do an H1, and I'm going to give it a Tailwind class just to show you that that works. And we'll just say welcome. Okay, so you can see that the heading, this class is working. Tailwind just works right out of the box because we selected it when we initialized the project. Okay, so now what I want to do is set Sentry up, which is pretty simple. So we're going to go to Sentry.io. And as far as pricing goes, absolutely free for a single developer, one user, error monitoring, tracing, you get session replays, alerts, all kinds of stuff. So we're just going to sign in. You can use Google or GitHub. I'm going to use GitHub. All right, and then from here, so for me, I have all these issues because I already have a project, but you won't see that. What you want to do is create a project. You can also create a team as well. And then here, you want to select your platform. We're going to select Next.js. And then you can set your alert frequency because it's really cool. You can get emails and alerts when a user runs into an issue, and it just notifies you right away so you can get to the problem and fix it as soon as possible. But for me, I'm just going to choose, I'll create my own alerts later. And the project name, I'm going to change that to quick-ticket. Use my Traversy Media team, but you can create a new one if you want. And then it's going to give you this npx Sentry Wizard command. So basically, this will install all the dependencies that we need, and it will create our config files and anything else that Sentry needs to be integrated into our project. So just copy that. I'm going to stop the server and then just paste that in and run it. And it has our project name and team name as well. And then it's going to ask some questions. So I have untracked files. Do you want to continue? We'll say yes. And it's just going to validate in the browser and then send you back to the terminal. And we're going to just pretty much select the defaults for the rest of the questions. So do you want to route Sentry requests in the browser through your Next.js server? We'll say yes. Enable tracing, yes. Enable session replay. And then it's asking if we want to create an example page, which you don't have to, but I'm going to just to kind of show you how Sentry works. So I'll choose yes for that. It's going to ask if you're using a CI/CD tool. So if you plan on deploying to like Vercel or GitHub, if you want to use GitHub Actions or whatever, we'll say yes to that. And it's going to generate this Sentry AuthToken, which you don't have to copy because what happened is it created this .env Sentry build plugin file, and it has the token in there. In fact, what we can do is just rename that to, we want to rename that to .env, and that will be our environment variable file. Get rid of the comments. I also like to just add quotes here. And now we have that auth token in there if we need it. So we'll just click enter again, and then we should be all set. All right, now I want to run the server, so npm run dev. And I just want to quickly show you, before we set up our Neon database and stuff, I want to show you how to integrate, how Sentry works. So let's open our project back up. And you'll notice that in your project, if you chose to show the example page, you'll have this Sentry Example page folder in your app folder, which means that that's an accessible route. So if I were to go to localhost 3000 / Sentry Example page, that should load. And it has a button that says throw sample error, but I'm not going to click that just yet because I want to show you that page. So Sentry Example page TSX. And this, we're going to delete this after, so you don't really have to worry about this. I just want to show you where the button clicks. So basically, it first calls this sentry.startSpan, and this is if you want to test performance of the page. And I'll show you this in the Sentry dashboard. Now, when we click it, it runs a function and it makes a request to /API/Sentry Example API. And if we look in our API folder, we can see that route right here. All right, so it makes a request to that route. Let's take a look at it. This is the route, and all it does is it throws an error, just a kind of a sample error, and passes in a message, Sentry Example API route error. And then back in the page where it makes the request, it checks to see if the response is okay, or if it's not okay, and if it's not, then it throws an error here. Okay, so two errors are being thrown, one in the back end or API, and one here in the front end. Now let's jump over to the page. Let's click the button. That makes the request, throws the error, and you can see sample error was sent to Sentry. Now if we go over to Sentry and go to issues, make sure that the right project is selected. So for me, quick ticket. And we can see the example front end error and the API error. Okay, so it tracks our errors, and if we click on the front end error, it's going to show you basically any information that is possible to see. It shows the server information, the IP address, which I don't care if you guys see, I'm on a VPN. And then if you scroll down, you can see what are called the breadcrumbs, which is just kind of a trail of what happened to get to that, from the UI click to making the request to the exception. You have the trace, you have the stack trace, you have your HTTP information, so you'll be able to see the user's device and operating system, things like that, the browser they're using. So again, just all the information that is possible on a single request. And then one really cool addition is this session replay, where you can see exactly what happened in the browser prior to that error being thrown. So in my case, obviously I just clicked a button, and that's not very helpful in terms of debugging. But if it was something different, like let's say a form that a user was filling out, maybe we could see that they missed a field, or they filled out something wrong or in the wrong order. So any mistake in the UI, we would be able to see here, which is really cool. And then if we go back to issues, you also have the API route error. There's no replay for this because it's an API error, it's a back-end error, but we do have the breadcrumbs, we have the stack trace, HTTP info, and so on. All right, and then if we go to traces, remember that start span, so this will show you any spans that were created and shows you the performance. So you can see the page loads, the performance of that page. So, and I don't use this too much, so I don't know too much about it, but you can just test performance of different routes and see if you need to make any adjustments. Okay, so that's kind of the gist of Sentry, and of course you can make all types of logs and stuff. We'll be doing that throughout our project, so you can see how it works. Okay, and if we go back to issues, you can change the priority to low, medium, high. We can, let's say that these are resolved, we can just mark resolved, and then they'll go away. But it's just nice to have one place where all of your issues, all of your logs, warnings, errors, everything is shown here. All right, so back to our project, we can now delete both of those pages. So the Sentry Example page, we can delete that. Sentry Example API folder, we can delete that as well. And we'll just go back to back to the home page here. Okay, so now we want to set up our database, which is very, very simple using Neon. So let's jump over to neon.tech and we're going to log in. You can log in with GitHub or Google. And it's literally just like a couple fields. So new project, add a project name. I'm going to call it quick-ticket. Database name, let's say quick-ticket-db. I'm going to keep AWS as my provider, create, and now we have a cloud database. Now, to connect to it, we can click connect, and then it gives us this string where we want to say show password and then copy the snippet, and we want to put that in the .env file that we already created. So here, let's say database_URL, and I'm going to set that to that database string. Okay, and Prisma, when we set that up, is going to use this database string, and we'll be able to run migrations, create some schemas, and it'll create our database tables. Okay, and you can see your tables here, which right now, obviously we don't have any, but we will after we run our migration. Now to initialize Prisma, let's go ahead and I'm just going to open up a new tab, and I'm going to run npx, because we don't have Prisma installed globally, so npx Prisma init. All right, and what that does is it creates a Prisma folder with a schema.prisma file, and it has our client generator, our data source, which in our case is Postgres, and this is where it uses that database URL that we just created. Now, I would suggest that you install the Prisma VS Code extension if you are using VS Code, so this right here, because this will give you, syntax highlighting, linting, code completion. So definitely, get that installed. And then let's open up our schema file, and from here we can create what are called models. And any resource in your project, like users, tickets in our case, blog posts, products, anything like that, you're going to create a model here and then run the migration, which will then create the table. So there's no logging in to your database and writing raw SQL queries or anything like that. This makes it really easy. So let's create a model called ticket. And in our ticket model, we want to have an ID, and the type for that will be int. So these are Prisma specific types. And then we can add special options. In this case, I'm going to use @ID, which defines a custom primary key. Okay, so in our database, this will be a variable character, and it'll be marked as a primary key. And then we can add defaults, so @default, and then I want to add in auto increment parentheses. So that will mark it as auto increment so that when we create our first ticket, it'll have an ID of 1, next will be 2, and so on. Okay, after ID, let's do a subject, which will be a string, and then let's do description, which will also be a string. Then we'll do a priority, that will also be a string. And then we're going to have a status. Status will be a string, and I want to give this a default. So the default for status is going to be a string of open. And then we want created at. That type is going to be a date time. And let's do a default for that, which is going to be now with parentheses, so that'll just be the current date and time. And then we'll do an updated at, and that will be a date time, and we can do @updated at, which will just add whatever the current date and time is for that update. So later on, we'll have a user model as well when we implement authentication. But for now, I just want to be able to create and read tickets through our project. So yeah, we can close this up. And there's two things we have to do. Whenever we edit that file, whether we create a new model or we edit fields in a current one, we have to run the migration and we have to generate the client. So let's come down to the terminal and let's do our migration with npx prisma. So whenever we run a Prisma command, we're going to do npx unless it's installed globally. And then we want to run migrate dev -- name, and I'm going to call it init since it's our first one. And what this is going to do is look at that file. It's going to look at our ticket model, and it's going to create a table in our database based on that. So now it says your database is now in sync with your schema, which is good. So now let's go to Neon, and I'm going to reload the tables. And you'll see a migrations table as well, because whenever you create a migration, it puts it in here. But we can see ticket with an ID, subject, description, so all the fields that we put in our model. So it's as easy as that to create tables. Now the second thing we have to do is run npx prisma generate. So that will generate the client. So then when we're in our code and we use the client, we can now work with tickets. Now, one other thing that we need to do is in the package.json, we want to add a post install script, because when you deploy this, whether it's to Vercel or wherever, you want to generate the client on the server. So the way you do that is add a post install script, and from here just simply add Prisma generate so that runs when you install or when you deploy. Okay, so yeah, so we should be good as far as the database goes. Now in this tab, so here I have my npm run dev. In this one, I want to run Prisma Studio, which is going to be npx Prisma Studio. And this is a really cool tool that will show you all your tables, all your data. You can see I have my ticket table, ID, subject. So obviously I have no tickets, but if I did, they would show here. So I'm going to keep this open so that we can always refer to our data if we need to. So now that we've done that, I'm going to start working on the actual UI, but I just want to initialize a Git repository. So I'm going to open up a new tab here, and let's just do Git Init. You also want to make sure, I believe it's by default, but make sure your git ignore has the .env. Yeah, so it does. All right, and then let's do git, let's say git add all, and I'm going to say git commit. Obviously, you can do this whenever you want. Whoops. Shoot, didn't mean to do that. So git commit, and let's see, we'll say initial I guess initial Prisma setup. Yeah, we'll just do that. All right. And I'll be making commits off camera, but like I said, you can, obviously make whatever commits you want. Okay, so now we're going to work on the welcome page, which is app and then page.tsx. And for this, it's going to be a welcome page with two buttons. One is going to be to create a new ticket. One is going to be to see your tickets. Okay, so we're going to bring in a couple things here. Let's import link from NextLink. And then I want to use an icon here from React Icon. So FA ticket alt. All right, and then for the JSX, it's just a bunch of tags and classes. So I'm going to paste it in. So for the return in parentheses, we'll go ahead and paste that. Now one thing I did forget to do is in the global CSS, I want to change the background to EFF6FF, which is a light gray. Now the reason this is dark is because of this block here. And since I'm not using any kind of dark mode, I'm going to just get rid of that block, okay, which will make the background light. And I haven't used the ticket yet, so let's add that. I'm going to go right above the H1. And again, you can copy this if you want. You can type it out, or you can get it from the repo. But let's add FA ticket alt, and then just a couple classes. So MX auto. What else did I want to do? We'll do margin bottom 4, and I'm going to make it red, so text red 600, and then we can also add a size for the icons. I'm going to do 60, so that will just add a little red icon. Now, one other thing I wanted to do is just something really simple, but I figured that it's just a nice add-on, is to have these buttons fade in and up when we come to the page. So what I'm going to do is the wrapper that is around the two links, I'm going to add to that a new class called animate. We'll say animate-slide. And then I'm also going to add a tailwind class of opacity 0, which is going to make them disappear at the moment, but then we'll fade them back in. So we're going to do that through our global CSS file. So let's see, we'll go down here. We're going to create a new keyframe. So let's say keyframes, and we're going to call this slide up. And from here, I want to say at 0%. So at the start of the animation, I want the opacity to be 0, which is just, not there, invisible. And then we're going to add a transform and then translate on the y-axis because we want it to fade up. So I want it to start 20 pixels below. So we'll say 20 pixels, right? Which means it's going to be pushed, the buttons will be pushed down 20 pixels. Then on 100%, which is when the animation ends, is where we want to add opacity 1, which is, full view, no fading at all. And then transform, we want to do translate y and then put it back to its original position, which is 0. Okay, then all we have to do is take our animate-slide class that we added onto the wrapper and add the keyframe into the animation property. We want to use the slide up animation. The duration will be 0.6 seconds. We'll do an ease in and forwards. Okay, we don't want it to repeat, we just want it to do it once. And then animation delay, I'm just going to put a very slight delay of 0.2 seconds. So now when I save that, you can see that the buttons now fade in and up. If I reload, okay, so it's just a nice little addition. That's, not a lot of code at all. So that's that. Now I want to work on the submit ticket page. If I click that, it takes me to the route of, as you can see here, /tickets/new. Now, since Next.js is file-based routing, in the app folder, we're going to have a folder called tickets. And then in that, we'll have a folder called new. And then in that, we'll have a file called page.tsx. And let's do sfc. Oops. Sometimes this doesn't work, like now. sfc tab. Okay, there we go. And let's call this new ticket page. And whenever it's a page component, I always like to end it with page, just preference. And just to make sure this is working, let's just say new, and then this should show this. There we go. So we just see new on the page, and we're going to add our form here. Now to begin with, I'm just going to add the JSX, just tags and classes. So I'm going to paste it in. So the return, let's add some parentheses, and then paste this in. So basically we just have a div, flexbox, we have another div, which is kind of like the wrapper, the card or whatever, then h1, then we have a form with an input for the subject. Okay, so it has name subject, text area, which is going to be the description, and then a select box, which is going to be a priority of low priority, medium, and high, and then the submit button. So let's save that, and that's what the form is going to look like. Okay, so now we get to the fun part, which is submitting the form and making it work. Now we're going to be doing this the most modern way in Next.js, which is using server actions. Okay, so server actions are just files where obviously they run on the server, and you can submit directly to them. Like we can have an action attribute and submit it directly to the action, just like you would with like PHP, which is really cool. And we're also going to be using a new hook called useActionState. So let's start off by creating the action file for tickets, which is going to be in source. Create a folder in source called actions. And then let's create a file called ticket.actions.ts. Okay, so any actions that have to do with tickets, whether it's creating one or fetching them, whatever, we're going to put that in here. So this is the back end for tickets. Now, when you create a server action, the first thing you want to do at the very top is say use server. Okay, so that will mark it as a server action. And all a server action is an asynchronous function. So we're going to say async function create ticket. And this, you could do an arrow function if you want, but it's up to you. All right, now this is actually going to take in the form data, and we'll give it a type of uppercase F form data. Because when you use an action directly, that form data is available. So what we'll do is get, let's say, const subject, and set that to that form data, and then there's going to be a get method on that, and that's how we get our data. So we want to get the data or the input that has the name of subject. Okay, so this, whatever we put here, has to match the name. So this. So get form subject, and just to please TypeScript, we'll say, let's say as string. And then I'm going to do the same with the other fields. So we have the description, and then what do we got? The priority. So I'll just select this and this. So priority. And then just to test it out, let's do a console log. Again, this is not, there we go. It's console log of the subject, of the description, and the priority. And then I'm going to return from this an object that has a success Boolean. In this case, I'm just going to say true. So true, and then we'll do a message, and let's say ticket created successfully. I know it wasn't, but we'll just respond with that, because I just want to show you how this works if you've never used actions before. And now in the new ticket page, let's bring in, so import, let's bring in create new ticket. Why isn't it showing here? Did I export it? Or just create ticket. Import. There it is. All right. So create ticket, and then come down to the form, and we should be able to just add action, set that to the create ticket. And don't worry about this TypeScript error right now. So let's go ahead and try this. I'm just going to show the server console here, because when we submit, it should show it down here. And I have a form filler. I'm just going to use that and then submit. And there we go. So we can see the subject, the description, and then the priority, which was medium. So that's just how a basic action works. Now, we're not handling the response in any way, so we're going to get to that. But we need to use a hook that's relatively new called useActionState. So let's import that. So useActionState, and that's from React. And this is similar to useState, but instead of dealing with component state, we're dealing with the state that we get back from the action. Okay, so the way that this is going to work, and we have to make this a client component because we're using a hook. And I don't like to particularly use client components for pages, so later on we'll move the form itself to a client component and keep this server rendered. But just for now, we'll say use client. And then to use the useActionState, we're going to come up here above the return. Let's say const. We want to pass in state and form action. Okay, so we're destructuring from useActionState. And then what we pass into useActionState is going to be one, the action we want to use, which in our case is create ticket, and then the initial state, which is going to be success false and message just an empty string. Because remember, that's what we're getting back from here, from the create ticket. So we're just setting that initially before we actually submit the form. Success obviously will be false because it hasn't been submitted, and message will just be empty. Now, when we use an action in useActionState, we have to edit the function signature. So basically what gets passed in here. So in addition to form data, we need the previous state. Okay, so first we'll say prev state. Then we get the form data. And the previous state, as far as typing, is just going to be success, which is a Boolean, and the message, which is a string. And then let's add the return type here for this function. So the return is going to be a promise that will have an object with success, which will be Boolean, and a message, which will be a string. And again, you don't have to, if you're not using TypeScript, then you don't have to add that. All right, so back over here, now, instead of passing create ticket in directly, we want to pass this in, form action, because create ticket is being used through useActionState. So let's change that to form action, and that should clear up that error as well. Okay, and we should still be able to submit and console log. So let's try that real quick. I'm just going to add some stuff in here with the form filler, submit it, and we're seeing that in the console. All right, now I want to do some form validation. I know we used the HTML required here, but let's actually get rid of that for the text, for the description and the subject, because I want to validate here. And I also want to use Sentry to log if it's not valid or not, which might not be something you do in real life, because you probably don't want, for everybody that misses a field or whatever, you probably don't want that logged. But just to show you how we can capture messages with Sentry. So let's do a check, and let's say if not subject or not description or not priority, then I want to, first of all, we're going to do our return. And all of our actions are always going to return a success and a message. Okay, and that's just by design. That's not like, you don't have to do that. That's just what I'm choosing to do with my actions and how I'm handling things. So message, let's say all fields are required. Okay, now in addition to that, to returning, right above it, I want to use Sentry, so I need to import. And the way we do this is we say import all as Sentry from, and then at Sentry/Next.js. And then I'm going to do Sentry, and I'm going to use a method called capture message. And for that message, let's say validation error : we'll say missing ticket fields. Okay. And then when we get our when we get back here with the state, we can use that, right? So if there's an error, if success is not true, we probably want to show it in the form, right? So why don't we add this? Let's see, we'll go right below the H1 and open up some curly braces, and let's say state.message. So if there's a message, and if not, state.success. Okay, then we know it's an error. Then we want to show, let's open up some parentheses, then we want to show a paragraph. I'm just going to give it a class of text-red-500, and let's do margin bottom 4 and text-center. And then in the paragraph, we can just add our state.message. Okay, so whatever we're passing back here or here is going to be available in this state object. And I'm using that down here. So now let's fill this in, but let's leave off the subject, and we get all fields are required. Now this should also have gotten logged to Sentry, so I'm going to go to my Sentry issues, and since it's just a regular message, it's not going to show under prioritize, it's going to be under for review. And you can see our validation error missing ticket fields, and it shows the request, so post to tickets new, and it just shows the breadcrumbs that lead up to it, stack trace. Now when we capture a message, if we don't add a level manually, then it's going to be info, which is just just what it is. It's just like a log. It's not looked at as an error. It's not an exception. It's just a simple log. Now we can change that. So let's say we want to log it as a warning, which is probably what I do, because it's a little more than just information. Something did go wrong, but it's not, detrimental. So let's go back to where we have our capture message. And what we can do is just add a second argument here, and this will be, these are the different levels. So debug, error, fatal, info, which is what it is by default, log, and warning. So I'm going to set it to warning. So now I'll go ahead and save that, and then I'm going to go back to my project here. Let's refresh that, and this time let's leave off the description. Okay, so we get all fields are required, and let's go back to Sentry, and I'm just going to refresh this. So now if I go over to my validation error, now you can see that the warning, the level is now warning. And you can attach data to this as well, which I'll get into later. But I just wanted to show you that, how to capture a message. Now let's do, we're going to use capture exception. So if something really, if there's a problem with the server. So what we'll do is wrap everything here. We're going to do this anyway, is wrap this in a try catch. So let's open a try catch and just take everything that's in the function. And we'll just cut that and then put this in the try. And then what I want to do in the catch is first off our return, which I'll just copy this. So we're going to return false. Okay, and then for the message, let's just say, we'll just say an error occurred while, we'll say while creating the ticket. Okay, but before we do that, before the return, we're going to do Sentry, and now we're going to use capture exception. And in the capture exception, we want to pass in the error as an error. And then we can also pass data to this. So what I'm going to do is pass an object with extra, and I want the form data to be attached to this. So let's add an object with form data, and we can get that with, let's say, object dot, and then we'll use from entries, and then we'll pass in our form data dot entries parentheses. Okay, so that should pass the actual form data. Now to fire this off, what we'll do is just temporarily throw an exception. So in the try at the very top, let's say throw new error. Okay, and then I'll just say simulated Prisma error for testing. And we'll save that, and then we're going to go ahead and submit our form. Let's just refresh this. And we don't, it doesn't matter, you don't have to leave anything off or whatever, just submit. And we get back an error occurred while creating the ticket, because when we submitted, it threw this error, which then called the code in the catch, which returns this. And that this message was put in the output. Now this also ran, so it captured the exception with Sentry. So let's take a look at that. And let's go to issues. So now we have this in prioritize, right? It's not in the for review, it's in prioritize because it's an actual error, it's an actual exception. So let's go ahead and click on that, and we see our breadcrumbs, and then we should see, let's see, down at the bottom, right here. So additional data, we have our form data, and you can see here the subject, the priority, the description, and then we have these action keys, action ref. So this was attached to the exception, and you can attach anything you want, which will obviously help you in your your debugging process. Now, before we do anything else, I want to actually be able to submit a ticket and add it through Prisma. Now, there's a step that maybe I should have did it earlier, but we need to at least do it now, and that is create a special file for our Prisma client, because if we use it as is, the Prisma client as is, we could run into some issues because of the way that server-side rendering works and the way that platforms like Vercel work with Neon, which is serverless, meaning there's not like a continuous connection. So we don't want a case where multiple Prisma instances are being created. Basically, we want to create a global instance and then reuse that unless it's not created, right? So we wanted to check to see if there's a global Prisma instance. If there is, use it. If there's not, then create it. So what we're going to do is create a new file in the source folder, or new folder rather, called db, so source db, and then a file in that called prisma.ts. And then I'm going to paste this in, and you can either copy it or you can grab it from the repo, whatever. And it's doing what I said. It's bringing in the client, and it's bringing it in from the generated file rather than just at Prisma/client. So this should match whatever you have in your schema. So right here, let's see, for this output, right? So source generated Prisma. So that's what you want to bring the client in from here. And then we're using the global this object, which is a global JavaScript object, like window for the browser or global for Node.js. And we're just assigning that Prisma client. Here, we're checking to see if it exists. So if it does, set it to Prisma. If it doesn't, create a new Prisma instance, and we're exporting it. So from now on, when we want to use the Prisma client, we want to use this. Okay, we want to bring it in from this file, db/Prisma, not from Prisma client and not from the generated. So let's save that and now go back to our ticket actions where we're going to use Prisma, and we're going to import, let's say, Prisma, and that's going to be from, and then @/db/Prisma. Okay, so again, whenever you're going to use the client, bring it in from here. And then I'm also going to import one more thing, and that's going to be revalidate revalidate path from next/cache. So that will just make sure everything's up to date. When we submit a ticket, we want to make sure our list of tickets includes that new ticket. All right, for certain paths. So now let's get rid of this simulated error. So get rid of that, and then we're getting the data, we're checking it, we're sending to Sentry if needed. Now what I'm going to do is go right above the return in the try block, and let's say create ticket. So we'll say const ticket and set that equal to await prisma.ticket. And then we're going to use the create method, and that's going to take in an object with data. And for the data, we want to send the data from the form. So subject, description, and priority. So that'll create the ticket. Now, I want to capture this in Sentry when we create a new ticket, and I want to create a breadcrumb, which is a trail of how that happens. So we're going to say Sentry dot, and then add breadcrumb. And we can pass in a few things here. So one is a category. So this has to do with tickets. So we'll have a ticket category. Let's add a message. So I'm actually going to use backticks here because I want to include the ID. So we'll say that the ticket was created, and then we'll just add in the ticket.id. All right, and then we can add a level as well. So remember the different levels I showed you. This is not a warning or an error. It's just a log. So we're going to use info. And then I want to capture a message. So let's say sentry.capture message. And again, we'll just use backticks and say ticket was created. We'll say ticket was created successfully. And then we'll have the ticket ID. And then the last thing we want to do before we return success is revalidate the path. So we want to revalidate the /tickets path, which doesn't exist yet, but it will, and it'll list all of our tickets. So we want to make sure that it's up to date with this latest ticket. All right, so let's try this out. I'm going to come over to new, and I'm not going to use my form filler. I'm going to type in here, let's say ticket 1. This is a sample ticket, and let's make it medium priority. Let's submit. Now I have nothing happening when we submit, so don't worry about that. We'll redirect or show a message or something. But let's go to Prisma Studio. You could also use you could check Neon directly. But if we go to Prisma Studio and reload, there it is, ticket 1. This is a sample ticket, medium for the priority, and the status is open by default. And we can go to Neon and reload our table. And you can see that our ticket is there in the database. And we can go to Sentry, and we should have under for review, ticket was created successfully. And we have our breadcrumbs here as well. And of course, this is optional, but again, it's nice to just know exactly what's happening throughout your application. All right, so one thing I'd like to do though, before we move on, is create a helper function for this Sentry stuff, because I want to just have one function called log event, and that will add a breadcrumb, and it will add either a message or an exception, depending on if there's an error or not. If there's an error, it'll be an exception. If not, it'll be a message. So what we can do is go into source, and let's see, we'll create a folder here called utils. And in utils, let's create a file called sentry.ts. And we want to import all as sentry from at sentry Next.js. And then I'm going to add a type of log level. Actually, let's make that an uppercase L. So type log level. Again, if you're not using TypeScript, you don't have to do this, but it has to be either fatal or error, or what's the other ones? Warning, or info, or debug. Okay, so it has to be one of these. And then let's export our function, and function, I'm going to call this log event. Okay, now this is going to take in a few things. It's going to take in the message, which will be a string. It's going to take in the category, which will be a string, and we'll give it a default of general. Okay, then we'll do optional data. So the question mark just means it's optional. And for the type, we're going to use record. So record, and then in angle brackets, we're going to add string and any. Now this record means that it can be an object with any number of properties and values of any type. So this is useful for logging additional information about the event. For example, we can log the ticket ID or the user ID. Then we're going to take a log level. The type for that is going to be the type we just created above, which is log level, and I'm going to set the default to info. And then we'll have the error, which will be optional because it could be just a message. There might not be an error, and I'm going to give that a type of unknown. All right, so now in the actual function, we're first going to create our breadcrumb, so sentry.addBreadcrumb. And then we're going to pass in an object with the category. So this stuff is all going to come from the arguments. So category, the message, the data, and the level. Okay, it may or may not have an error. And then let's see. Oh, you know what? This should just be level, like that. So we got our breadcrumb. Then we want, whether it's going to be capture message or capture exception depends on if there's an error. So let's say if there's an error, then we want to call sentry.captureException and pass in the error and then any extra data. So remember, we can do this extra and then pass in our data. And let's say else, if there's not an error, then we want to just capture message. So capture message, pass in message, and pass in the level. And that's it. Okay, so make sure that, that this function is being exported so that we can use it. And we'll close that up. And now we can use this in place of a lot of the stuff we did here, just kind of clean it up a little bit. So in this, right, where we check for the fields, instead of doing the capture message, let's get rid of that. And let's say, well, actually, we have to bring in log event. So just make sure you bring that in right here, import from utils Sentry. Then we're going to log event, and let's pass in the message, which is going to be validation, error, colon, and we'll say missing ticket data, or not, yeah, we'll say missing data fields. And then the second thing we're going to want to pass in is the category, which is going to be ticket. Okay, then we want to pass in the data, which I'm going to pass an object with the subject, the description, and the priority. And then after that, we want the level, which is going to be, in this case, warning. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. We're passing in the message, the category, the data, and the level, and that's going to, you know, it's going to call our log event, which we just created. So now let's come down here where we do the breadcrumb and the message, and we can replace both of those. So we'll get rid of that, and then we can just do our log event. And we'll pass in a message. I'm going to use backticks and say ticket created successfully. And let's add the ticket ID. So ticket.id. And then after that, we want the category, which is ticket. After that, we want the data, which I'm going to do ticket ID. Set that to ticket.id. And then the level, which we'll do info. Okay, so that'll log that. Then let's come down to the where we do the capture exception. And the way that we created it, we can do log event for exceptions as well. So let's say an error occurred while creating the ticket. Okay, so that's that. Then we want the category, so ticket. Then we want the data, which again I'm going to do the form entries or form data. So an object, and let's do from entries, and then we can pass in the form data dot entries. Okay, and then we want to pass, let's see, after that object, so comma here, we want to pass in the level, which is going to be an error, and then we want to pass in the error itself, okay, which comes from here. So now we can use just this one function we can use to add the breadcrumbs, capture the message, capture the exception, add categories, and all that stuff, all that good stuff. Okay, so now let's just try this one more time. I'm going to first off try to do it without a field, so that should throw an error, or a warning rather. And then let's create another ticket. Let's say ticket ticket 2. This is a sample ticket, and then I'll do low priority submit. All right. So now if we go back to Sentry, you should see created. Sometimes it takes, I've seen it take up to like a minute or so, but we should see the next ticket. Let's just make sure it was actually submitted. So let's go to Prisma Studio and reload. Okay, so ticket 2 was created. And there it is. So ticket created successfully, and we can see it as an ID of 2. So it took about 30 seconds to be able to show up. So now I want to make it so that it redirects when we submit a ticket. So what we can do is we're going to do this in the page or the component, not the action, because the action is always going to return an object with not true, but success and message. So what we'll do is come back to the page. So this is the new page, and I want to bring in useEffect. And basically we want to check that success option, right? And if that changes, then we want to redirect, because when we get a response back, that it'll send a success message, or not a success message, but a value. So let's see, we also want to bring in the use router hook. So let's import, say, use router, and that's going to be from Next Navigation, not from Next Router. And then we'll go right above the return. Let's add our useEffect. And I'm assuming that you know how useEffect works. We're going to pass in our dependency array, and we want to look at the state.success or the router. So if either of those changes, and I didn't initialize the router, which we have to do. So let's say const router, set that to use router. Okay, so if either of those changes, then whatever I put in this useEffect is going to run. And what I want to put is, first of all, just check for if state.success, and then we want to redirect. So router.push, and we want to redirect to /tickets. Okay, so I'm just going to refresh this tickets new. And now if I submit a new ticket, so ticket 3, this is a sample ticket, and then if I submit that, I get redirected to /tickets, which of course doesn't exist yet. So let's create that now. We already have in our app folder, we already have a tickets folder with the new folder, but we want to create a page.tsx directly in the app tickets folder. So let's create page.tsx. Let's do sfc. And let's call this tickets page. And for now, I'll just say tickets. So that should render. All right. Now, before I add anything to the tickets page, I want to add a toast notification when we submit a new ticket. And I'm going to use a package called Sonner. Sonner, it's S-O-N-N-E-R. And I've been using this lately rather than React Toastify. But you could use that if you want to. I mean, they all do kind of the same thing. But let's go to a terminal, and I'm going to npm install Sonner. Okay, in order to use this, we're going to add in our layout. So if you go to your layout TSX file, we're going to import the toaster. So toaster from Sonner. And let's see, we're going to go right under children, so right here, and we're going to add toaster like that, and then I'm going to just add a position, and you can go to the documentation to see like the different attributes and positions and stuff. I'm going to do top center. Okay, so now we have an output for our toaster. Now let's go back into the new page. All right, so this is the new ticket page, and we're going to import toast. So import toast from from Sonar. Okay, and then all I'm going to do is go to the use effect. So right before we redirect, we're going to say toast.success, and let's say we'll say ticket submitted successfully. And yeah, that should do it. So I'm going to save that. And let's change this title, this Create Next App. So that's going to be in the layout. So, where is it? Yeah, right here. Let's change that to, we'll say quick ticket support. And let's say get support for your product or whatever you want to put. Anything's better than create next app. Okay, so let's try this out. I'm just going to put some dummy data and submit. And there we go, ticket submitted successfully. So it shows the toast. And then it goes away after a few seconds. Now, before we actually work on this page, the tickets page, I want to move, like I said earlier, I want to move the form from the new page here because I don't want this to be client rendered. I want this to be server rendered. And I think it's just better organization. So why don't we create a new file? And you could put this in a components folder, but the way I like to do this is if the form is you know, so attached to the page and we're not using this form anywhere else, I'm going to put it in the new folder next to the page. So I'll create a new file here, and let's call this ticket, we'll say ticket-form.tsx. All right, and then I'm basically going to just copy everything from the page, paste this in here, and then I'm going to change the name. So new ticket page here, and here at the bottom, we're going to change to new ticket form. Okay, so change the name of that. And let's see, we're going to basically keep all this. So we have our use effect. And let's see, what I don't want to keep is this div here. Let's get rid of this top div in the ticket form. So right here, I'm going to delete that. And then, of course, we got to delete the ending div. Okay, so we'll get rid of that. And I think that's really all we need to do. Everything else is you know, encapsulated in this file. So let's save that and go back to our page. And now I'm just gonna get rid of this whole thing. Let's regenerate this. So new ticket page. And then what we can do is bring in the new ticket form, right? And let's see, I want that wrapping div. So let's do some classes here. We're going to do min-h screen. And what else do we have? bg-blue 50 flex items-center justify-center and px-4. Okay, so we have that wrapping div, and then in there we can put the new ticket form. All right, so let's save that. Let's try to go to /ticket/new, and then we should see our form. So the page itself is server rendered, but then we're putting in a new ticket form, which is client side. So now we want to work on getting the tickets, and we're going to have an action for that. So let's go into our ticket actions, and we'll go down to the bottom here, and let's say export async function, and we'll call this get tickets. Okay, we're going to add a try catch. And we're going to use Prisma here. So let's say const tickets and set that to await. And we want Prisma.ticket. And we're going to use the find many method. And I want to order by the date, so we're going to pass in here order by, and we want to set, let's say, created at. That's the field we want to use, and we want it to be descending. So that will get our tickets. And then let's do a log event for Sentry. So just log event, pass in fetch ticket list. And this is totally optional. And if you want to pick and choose some of this stuff to log, you can. I'm going to pass in here the count of tickets, so we can get that with tickets.length. So that'll be the extra data. And then let's make it an info level. Okay, and then we just want to return the tickets. And then if there's an error, let's log event. And we'll say error fetching tickets. And let's do the category of ticket. And I'm not going to send any data, so I'll just put an empty object. The level is error, and we want to send the actual error. And then what I want to return is just an empty array. And that's it. So that should get our tickets. Now we want to use that in our ticket page. So let's go to our app folder, tickets, and then page.tsx. And then from here, we're going to bring in, let's say, import. We want to bring in that action, so get tickets. And then we're going to also bring in our log event utility. And then let's bring in link. Okay, and then we're going to come down into our function here, and we want to use that action, so we can just simply say get const and then tickets, set that to await get tickets. And we do have to make this asynchronous. Okay, so that'll get our tickets, and we can do a quick console log. I don't know why that's not working. So console log of the tickets, just to make sure that we're getting them. So I'm going to go to /tickets. Oops. All right, and we should see that down here. Yep. So there we go. We know that we're getting them from our action, which is good. So let's get rid of that console log, and then down here, we're going to make this a div, and let's give it some classes. We're going to do a min h screen bg blue 50, and let's do a padding of 8 all around. Okay, let's get rid of that, and then I want to have an h1, so we'll do text 3xl. Let's do font bold, text blue 600, margin bottom 8, and let's do text center. And then in the H1, we'll just say support tickets. Okay, let's see if that shows up. There we go, support tickets. I just want to make this smaller. Okay, now under that H1, I want to check to see if there are any tickets first. So what we can do is say if the tickets.length, so if that is equal to 0, then we'll show something else. So if it's equal to 0, then I'm going to have a paragraph with, let's say, text center. Let's do text gray 600. And we'll just say no tickets yet. Okay, so that's if there's no tickets. And then here in these parentheses, if there are tickets, then we're going to have a class of, let's do space dash on the y-axis 4. We're going to do a max width, so max W 3XL. And let's do margin on the x-axis auto. And we'll close that sidebar up. So in here, we want to take our tickets and we want to create a list. So we want to map through those. So tickets.map, pass in our function, and we'll say for each ticket, then we want to render some JSX. So let's open some parentheses. We'll have a div. Let's do a class of flex. We'll do justify dash between. Let's do items dash center. Background is going to be white, and I want some rounded corners, so rounded large. We'll do a shadow. We'll do a border, and let's do a border dash gray dash 200 and padding 6. Okay, so in this div, actually, you know what? We got to give this a key because it's a list. So for the key, I'm going to use the ticket.id. All right, and then I'm just going to put a comment here. So we'll have the left side, and we'll have the right side. Okay, so for the left side, we're just going to have a div, and then in that we'll have our h2. Let's say text-XL for the size, and then font- semi-bold, and let's do a text blue 600. And this is going to be the ticket subject, so we're going to say ticket.subject. See if that renders. There we go. Good. So we see all the subjects. And that's all I want on the left side. So the right side, let's do text-right class, and let's add some space. So space on the y-axis too. And then let's have a div with text-small and text-gray-500. And I want the priority. So we'll say priority, and then here I want to have a span. So we'll do a span with, actually we'll do the class after, because I actually want it to be a dynamic class where it's a different color depending on the priority. But for now, we'll just add ticket priority. Okay, if I save that, there we go. We see the different priorities. And then we also want a link to go to the single individual ticket page. So that's going to go under this div, the div that wraps the priority. And let's add a link. And this is going to be, let's say, href, use some backticks here. Well, backticks in curly braces. And that's going to be /tickets. So /tickets/ and then we want the ID. So ticket.id. And I also want to just add some classes on this link. Let's close it. And it'll just say view ticket. Okay, now as far as the classes go, I'm just going to grab them because it's quite a bit. Okay, so those are the classes. Let's take a look. Okay, there we go. Good. Now, again, I want to just make the priority a certain color. So I'm going to have a little helper function. I'll just put it in this file. So I'm going to put it right here. We'll say const, and let's call this get priority class, which will take in priority, which is going to be a string. Okay, and whoops, I'm going to set. Okay, and then I'm just going to use a switch here. So for the switch, we want to test the priority. And let's say if there's a case of it being high, then, whoops, what am I doing? Case high. Then we want to return a class of text-red-600. And I'm also going to just add font-bold. And then let's do a case where it's medium. Then we'll return, let's say text-yellow. Yeah, we'll do yellow 600, font bold. And then we want a case of low. And if it's low, we're going to return text-green-600 and font bold. All right, so we have our get priority class. Now we want to use this down here. So let's see, we want to use it on the span. So right here on the span, I'm going to give it a class name, and that class name is going to be set to, it's going to be dynamic, and it's going to be set to get priority class, and then we'll pass into that the ticket dot priority. So if we save that, now you can see the different colors. Okay, so we have medium, low, right? There's no high. I guess we can go to /new, create a new ticket. I'll just say new ticket. This is a test, and we'll choose high, submit, and there we go. So yeah, this is starting to come together. Now, the next thing I want to work on is the single ticket page. If I click on the view ticket, it takes me to the route, ticket / and then the ID. So that's what we'll work on next. Now, I usually like to start with the action first. So let's create an action that will get an individual ticket. So let's export a function down here. So export async function, and we're going to call this get ticket by ID. And it's going to take in an ID, which is going to be a string. And then first thing we'll do, let's add a try catch. And then we want to get the ticket using Prisma. So we'll say ticket, set that to await on Prisma.ticket, and we're going to use the find unique method. And in find unique, we're going to pass in an object. We want to find where the ID is equal to the ID. Now, I want to cast this as a number, so I'm going to wrap this in number like that. All right, and then we'll check for the ticket. So we'll check if not ticket. So if not ticket, then I want to log a Sentry event. So we'll call log event. And let's pass in a message. We'll say that the ticket, so ticket not found. We'll give it a category of ticket. And let's attach we'll attach the ID. So ticket ID, set that to the ticket.id. And then we'll give it a warning type. All right, let's see. Oh, I'm sorry, this should not be ticket ID, it's just ID, because it's getting passed in here. And then we just want to return the ticket. Now in the catch, I want to log event. And I'm going to just say error fetching ticket details. And we'll give it the category of ticket. We'll give it, for data, ticket ID, which is going to be ID. And the level is going to be error, and we want to pass the actual error. And then we want to return null, like that. So for the page, right, so we need to create a page for an individual ticket. Now this is a dynamic route, so what we can do is go into tickets, right, because we want it to be, for instance, /ticket/1, which would be the ID of 1. So we create a folder in tickets, and we use brackets and then call it ID, right? So that's the name of the folder, brackets ID. The brackets just signifies that it's dynamic, and this could be anything. And then in that we have our page.tsx. Okay, and then we're going to call this, let's do SFC. Let's call this, we'll call it ticket details page. And then for now, we'll just say details. And then this should load if you go to ticket / and then an ID like 5 or whatever. Okay, if I go to /1, that should still work. So we want to bring our action in. So up at the top here, let's import get ticket by ID. Let's import our log event utility. And let's import link from NextLink. And then I want to also import not found. So let's say not found, and that's going to be from Next Navigation. Okay, so it'll just load the 404 if we call that. And then I'm going to, we're going to have the same colors for the priority, so we can actually copy from, let's see, from this page, the tickets page, this get priority class. We could put this in, I guess we could put this in a separate file rather than repeat ourselves. Yeah, I guess we could do that. Why don't we just, let's cut it, and we can put it in our utils. So let's say utils, we'll create a new file here, and I'll just call it, we'll call it UI.ts, just for little UI things like this. Okay, and then I'm going to paste that in. Let's export it. Okay, and then we'll bring that in here. This is the tickets page. So import, what is it? Get priority class. And then we want to bring it in to this as well, our ID. Okay, now we can use that when needed. So let's see, this ticket details page, we have to get the ID from the URL, right? So if it's 1, we have to be able to get that, and the way we get that is by passing in, first of all, let's make this async, and then we're going to pass in, let's say, props, and it's going to be params. The type will be a promise, and it'll be in brackets, it's going to be an object with ID, which will be a string. Okay, and then we can destructure from that, let's say const, from the params or props params, we can destructure the ID. So we're going to get that from, and then await props dot params. That should give us the ID. In fact, we can test that out by coming down here, let's say details, and then I'll just add ID like that, and we should see details 1. If I go to details/2, then we see the 2. Okay, so that's how we can get the ID that's in the URL. Now we want to get the ticket by using this action, which takes in the ID. So right under that, let's say const ticket, set that to await, and then get ticket by ID, and pass in that ID. And if it's not found, so let's say if not ticket, then we're going to call not found. Okay, so it'll load the default not found page. And then I also just want to log event, and let's say viewing ticket details. Again, you don't have to do this stuff. I'm just trying to get you comfortable with logging stuff to Sentry, just so you have it, you know, all the events that are happening. So ticket, let's add the ID as well. So ticket ID, set that to, and this time it is ticket.id. And then we'll have info as the level. So now we want to obviously output the data. So I'm going to copy the JSX because it's mostly just static, you know, tags and classes. So let's see, we'll return in parentheses, I'll paste that in, save it, see what that looks like. Okay, so pretty simple. We just have a couple divs in H1. The H1 has the subject, and then we have this div with an H2 for the description, description label, and then a paragraph with the actual description. We have our priority using the get priority class to color it. Then we have the date, the created at, and then we have a link to go back to tickets. Okay, so that's ticket 2. If I go to ticket 3, we see ticket 3. So pretty simple. So next thing is the nav bar, because right now there's no way for me to get back to like the submit page or the create page without typing it in the URL. So we want to have some kind of nav bar. Also, when we start to implement authentication, we need a login link, a register, a logout link. That stuff's all going to go in the nav bar. So what we'll do is create in source. I don't believe we have a components folder yet, do we? No. So in source, I'm going to create a folder called components. And this is for UI components that, you know, are common and don't have anything to do with specific pages. So let's create a file here. We'll call it navbar.tsx and sfc navbar. Okay, and just for now, I'm just gonna say nav. And where we're gonna want to put this is in the layout, because I want it on every single page. So let's go into our app folder and then the layout file. And then from here, I'm gonna import the navbar, and I'm gonna put this just above the children line. So right here within the body, let's say navbar. Save that, excuse me, save that, and we should now see nav no matter what page we're on. So if I go to ticket/new, we still see that nav. And the nav stuff for now, I'm just going to paste in because it's just links. So let's go into the return here, put some parentheses, and I'm going to paste this in. Okay, we need to bring in link. So up at the top, let's import link from next link. And if we save that, we should see that render at the top. Okay, now this is all squished together on small screens, but later on when we have authentication, all of this will not show at the same time, right? If we're not logged in, then logout's not going to show. These two links aren't going to show. If we are logged in, then register and login are not going to show. So even on small screens, everything will fit. If you wanted to create like a hamburger menu, you could do that, but I don't want to really waste time on that because that's kind of not really what this is about. This is kind of beyond that. So I don't want to deal with hamburger menus. It's going to look good after we implement authentication, which is actually what I want to do next. So with authentication, you have a lot of different options. You can use something like NextAuth, which is very popular. You could use a library like Auth0, Clerk. So these are really great libraries, but I wanted to do this kind of in just a custom authentication flow using JSON Web Tokens rather than using a library. I think that stuff is fun to do. And this isn't going to be very difficult. We're going to use a package called Jose, which allows us to, create and sign JSON Web Tokens. It's very similar to the JSON Web Token library or package. So we're going to use that. We're also going to use bcrypt to encrypt our passwords, and we'll be dealing with cookies as well, because we'll have the JSON Web Token stored in an HTTP only cookie. So let's get started with that. All right, and first thing, before we do anything to do with authentication, we need a user table. So we're going to go back to our Prisma schema. All right, so Prisma schema, and if you have these comments, you can get rid of these. So we have our ticket model. Now we need to create a user model, but we also need to create a relationship between users and tickets. So let's go above ticket and let's create a model called user. All right, and then we're going to have an ID, which is going to be a string. I want this to be the primary key, so I'm going to say @ID. And then for the default, I'm not going to pass in auto increment. I actually want to pass in CUID, which is what does this stand for? It's collision. I think it's collision resistant unique identifier. So it'll generate a long random unique string that'll have numbers and letters, and it's more secure, so that's why I'm using it for users, and I'm just using regular auto increment for tickets. And you could do auto increment for users as well, but I think that this is a better idea. So we're going to do that for users. And then let's add an email, which will be a string. And I want emails to be unique, so we're going to add onto that unique. Then we have the name, which will be string. And names are going to be optional, so I'm going to put a question mark here. And then we get the password, which will be string. Then we have the created at, which will be a date time, and let's do the default for now. Right, then we have our updated at, which is going to be date time, and at updated at. Okay, now we need to create a relationship between users and tickets. So the way we do this is down here in the ticket model, we're going to add two things. One is going to be a user ID field, which is going to be a string. And then we want to add user, and this is where we're adding the relationship. So here for the type, we're going to say user, uppercase U, and we want to add onto this at relation, and then pass in fields. And for this fields, we want to add in the user ID, and then the reference to the field in the other table, which is going to be the ID. So references ID. Okay, so what we're saying is that this user ID field in this table is going to reference the ID in the user table. Now there's a red line here because one other thing we need to do is in the user, we now need to reference tickets and set that to ticket with brackets because it's going to be an array. Okay, so that's how we create a relationship between users and tickets. One thing I want to do is just delete any tickets that we have in there right now. So I'm going to go to Prisma Studio, and I'm going to just reload that and just delete all these. Okay, so if we were to go back to tickets, we see no tickets yet. All right, now in order for any of this to matter, to be updated in the database, we have to run the migration and generate the client again. So I'm going to stop Prisma Studio because sometimes that can interfere, and then I'm going to stop the server, and then we're going to do npx, and let's say Prisma. So npx Prisma migrate dev, and then -- name, and let's say add user model. So we're just giving a description of what we're doing. And let me just double check this before I actually run it. So yeah, I think that should be good. So let's run that. And what that should do is update the database where it'll create the user table and update the ticket table as well and add the user ID. And we can check that out. So let's go to, we can go to Prisma Studio. You know what, we'll check it after. We can check it in Neon real quick. So if I reload the Neon tables, there we go, we got our ticket, and we should have a user ID field. Yep, or user and user ID, and then we have the user table as well. All right, so now we want to generate, so npx Prisma generate. All right, so that looks good. Now I'm going to run npm run dev here, and then I'll run Prisma Studio in this one. So now you can see here, all models, we have both ticket and user. All right, so we can see both of those. Good. Now we can continue on with our authentication. So there's a few dependencies that we need to install. So let's say npm install, we want bcrypt.js, so that's to encrypt passwords, Jose for JSON Web Tokens, and cookie. All right, now we need to have some kind of secret to sign our token. So that's going to go in the .env file. So let's open that up. .env, and let's add, let's say auth underscore secret. Now, I mean, you can set this to whatever you want, but we can generate a random key that's 32 bytes long with open SSL rand dash base 6432. Okay, and then I'm just going to grab that and I'm going to use that as my auth secret. But again, that could be anything. Now, I just want to go over a couple of things real quick in some slides. So we're using JSON Web Tokens, and if you're not familiar with them, they're a compact URL-safe means of representing claims to be transferred between parties. And it's formatted as a long string with 3 different parts. And those 3 parts are a header, which says it's a JWT and also specifies the algorithm it uses to sign it. The payload, which is your user info or any data. You can encrypt any data into a JSON Web Token. And then the signature, which is a special hash to make sure that it hasn't been changed or tampered with. Okay, and if to give you an example, if we go to the JWT.io website, there's an example here. So this is what a token looks like, and it highlights in different colors the different parts. So again, the first part is the header, has the algorithm, and the second is the payload. So in this case, like the name is encrypted in there, the issued at date, and then the signature. So that verifies it hasn't been tampered with. So that's what the token actually looks like. Now, to give you an idea of the authentication flow that we're using, we're going to log in with our credentials, right? So we have a form where it's going to match our database email and password, encrypted password, of course. And I have a register page as well. And then the server checks those credentials, it matches them. If it fails, obviously, we have an error message and they can't go any further. Then if it does pass the credentials, then it stores the token. It'll sign and create the token, encrypt the data, and store it in a cookie. And you could also store it in local storage. Then you're going to have that cookie on the client and you send it with future requests. And then when you send it, the server verifies the token to make sure that it's not altered or anything, and it can see the encrypted data, which in most cases is going to be at least your user ID, so it knows who you are through that token. So that's our authentication flow. Now, in order to do this, we're going to have some low-level functions that we create and some higher-level functions and actions. So our low-level functions are going to be signAuthToken, which is going to generate, encrypt, and sign the token with that secret that we just created. VerifyAuthToken, which is going to decrypt and verify the token. So when you send it, it'll get verified. And then setAuthCookie is going to store that token in the cookie. getAuthCookie will get the token from the cookie. removeAuthCookie will remove the token from the cookie. So pretty simple, but these are the low-level functions. Now, the higher level functions, and most of these are going to be actions, are going to be register user, which is, these are pretty self-explanatory. It's going to create a user, login user, which is going to authenticate the user with the credentials. Logout user will call that removeAuthToken. Actually, I think it's removeAuthCookie, but we'll fix that. That clears the user, and then getCurrentUser is going to get the logged in user. So if you want to obviously view your tickets, it needs to know what user is logged in. And that happens because you authenticate the user, that ID gets put into the token, and then that cookie that has the token gets sent to the server on every request, and it validates the user, and then you can return it in this function and do what you want with that user. Show their tickets or submit a ticket from them or whatever it might be. All right, so let's start off with the low-level functions, and they're not huge functions, so we should probably just create them all now, and then we can just use them. We don't have to deal with going back into the file. So I'm going to put this in, let's see, I mean, you could put this in a number of places. I want to have a lib folder because this is kind of like an authentication library almost. So in source, let's create a new folder called lib, and then in that I'm going to create a file called auth.ts. Now there's a few things we need to import here. So from the Jose library, we're going to want sign JWT, and we also want JWT verify, which they do just that. It signs the token and verifies the token. And then we're going to import cookies. Now I think I installed the cookies package, but I don't think we're going to need that unless I installed it for another reason. I forget. Well, if I did, we'll get to it. But we can bring in cookies from Next headers, okay, because we're on the server side. And then let's import the log event from our Sentry utility. And then for the secret that's in the .env file, I'm going to put that in a variable. But in order for Jose to work with that, we need to encode it in a certain format, in unit 8 array format. So we're basically converting it to bytes, and we can do that with the text encoder function. So I'm going to say new text encoder and then dot encode, and then we can pass in our auth secret, which we can get from process.env because it's in the .env file, and then auth underscore secret. Okay, so we're going to need that in order to sign it. And then I'm also going to put the cookie name here because we're going to use it in a few different places. So cookie name, I'm just going to call auth-token. So when the cookie gets put on your browser, that's what it'll be called. And now we can start to create our low-level functions. So let's, and we're going to export them all. So we'll say export, and this is going to be async function, and we're going to call this signAuthToken. Now this is going to take in a payload, which is the data that we want to encrypt. And for now, I'm just going to use any as the type. And then let's do a try catch, and I'm going to close that up. So in the try, we want to create and sign our token. We can do that with the sign JWT function that we brought in, which is asynchronous. So we want to, let's see, we want to equals await, and then we're going to say new sign JWT, whoops, not that, sign JWT, and that takes in the payload, okay, because we're encrypting that payload into the cookie. Then we're going to call .setProtectedHeader and the algorithm that we want to use. So we're just going to use the HS256 algorithm. And then we want to also set the issued at. So let's say set issued at. That'll give it a field called IAT, so issued at, which will be just a timestamp of when it was issued. And then we also want the expiration, so that'll be set expiration time. And you can set it to whatever you want. I'm going to say 7D, which would be 7 days. And then we want to, the last thing we want to do is sign it. So .sign, and we sign it with the secret. Okay, so that will create the token, and then we simply want to return the token from this function. And then if there's something goes wrong, then we're going to log that event. And let's say token signing failed. And for the category, we're going to say auth. Okay, we're no longer dealing with tickets. And then I'm going to actually add the payload as the extra data. It's going to be of the log level error, and we're going to pass in the error. And then what we want to do here is just throw, let's say throw new error, and just say token signing failed. Okay, so that's our sign auth token. So it's pretty simple. We're just creating a token, setting the issued, the expiration, and we're signing it with the secret that's in our .env. And this has nothing to do with the cookie yet. It's creating the actual token. Now we need a way to verify it when that token gets sent in the cookie. So, and let's just put we'll put some comments here, I guess. Let's just say this will encrypt and sign token, and then this is going to decrypt and verify token. So let's say export async function, and we'll call this verifyAuthToken. And let's see, it's going to take in a token, which is going to be a string, and return a promise. And we're going to use a generic type here. So in brackets, we'll put this uppercase T. Same thing over here after the function name. So uppercase T. And this allows us to specify the type of the payload when we call this function. So for example, if we want to return the user ID in the email, we can specify that type at the time of calling the function. And then in the function body, this is where we're going to get the payload. So let's just do try catch here. And we can destructure the payload from the verify or JWT verify function, and that's asynchronous, so we do have to add a wait. And then this JW verify takes in the token and takes in the secret. Okay, and that token is going to get passed into this function. And then we want to just return the payload, and we're going to say as T. And then in the catch, let's do a log event, and let's say token decryption failed, and category is going to be auth. And for the data, we can send let's send the actual token, but we'll just send the first 10 characters. So we can do that. We're going to send an object with token snippet, and we can then take the token and just do dot slice and pass in from 0 to 10. So that'll give us the first 10 characters. And then we'll just add the error as the log level and the actual error message. Okay, and then I'm just going to throw new error. So throw new error, and let's say token decryption failed. So that's our verify auth token. All right, and the next thing we want is the setAuthCookie. So this is where we have the token, and then we want to put it into a cookie, so that we can then send it back to send it with every request to get validated or decrypted. So let's say set the auth cookie, and we're going to export function or async function, and we'll call this setAuthCookie, or you could call it setAuthToken, whatever you want. So that's going to take in the token, and we're going to wrap that. Okay, let's say const, and let's say cookie store, and then await cookies, which we brought in from Next.js, from this next headers. Okay, so we get our cookie store, and then we want to set the cookie. So we take our cookie store and then call .set, and then we pass the cookie name in, which I described above, right? So up above, it's going to be auth right here. Auth token is the cookie name. So I'm going to pass that in as the first argument, then the token, and then some options. So we're going to set the HTTP only. We want to set that to true. So this prevents JavaScript from accessing the cookie. So we want this makes it more secure. And then I'm going to set same site to lax, so string of lax, which means that it's not strict to our domain, but it can only get set from top level GET requests from other sites. There's no cross-site post requests or anything like that. And for secure, which means that it's only going to be used with HTTPS, I do want this to be true in production. So what we can do is set the process.env.node environment. We're going to look at that and say if it's equal to production, then this will be true. And then the path, which is going to be just slash. Then we have the max age. So when do we want this to expire? I want it to be 7 days. So I'm going to do 60 times 60. So 60 minutes times 60 seconds. And then we want to do times 24 which would be 1 day, and then we want to times 7, so that'll be 7 days. And I'll just put a comment here saying that's 7 days. And then in the catch, we're going to do a log event, and we'll say failed to set cookie, and that's going to be in the auth category, and we'll send the token, and it's an error, log level, and send the error. All right, so that's our setAuthCookie. Add the getAuthCookie. So this will, let's say, getAuthToken from cookie. So export async function, and let's call this get. Yeah, we'll say getAuthCookie. And first thing we'll do is get the cookie store. And we want to await on cookies. And then we'll create a variable called token, and we'll get that from cookie store dot get, and we want to pass in the cookie name, which is AuthToken. We put that up above, and then we just want to return the token. Now it's going to be in a value, so I'm going to say token.value, and we're going to use the optional chaining here just so we don't get any weird error messages. That should give us the token. Okay, then the last thing we want here is to remove AuthToken cookie. So let's call this removeAuthCookie. Okay, and we'll go ahead and actually let's put this in try catch. So I want to get the cookie store. So await, and then we're going to take the cookie store and we're going to call delete and pass in the cookie name. Okay, so that'll delete the cookie, and then in the catch, I'm just going to log event. We'll say that it failed to remove the cookie, the auth cookie. Set the category to auth, and just send an empty object for data, error, and error. That's it. So that's our authentication core. And if I mess something up in here, we'll fix it later on when we use it. But we have that, so we can close that up now, and we want to work on the actions as well as obviously the UI. So let's start off with registering users, and I'm going to do the action first. So in the actions folder, we want to have a new file here called, let's call it auth.actions.ts. I mean, you could call it user actions or whatever you want. So in this auth actions, let's make this a server action, so use server, and then we're going to import Prisma, and remember we want to bring that in from our file, so it's going to be @/db/Prisma, and then we're also going to be encrypting the password here, so let's import bcrypt from bcrypt.js, and then we'll also use our log event, and then we want to bring in the signAuthToken from our lib, and also the setAuthCookie. We're going to bring that in as well. And then let's create our function. This is going to be to register a new user. And we're going to export a sync function. We'll call it register user. All right, now when we have our form, we're going to be using the useActionState hook like we did with the token when we, I'm not the token, the ticket. When we submit a ticket, remember we use that hook. So that means that this is going to be an action that takes in two things: prev state, okay, and also the form data. So form data with the type is going to be form data. Now for the type for the state, it's gonna be a success and message. So I'm actually going to create the type here. So we'll say type response. We can do this in the other file, the tickets action as well. We'll just say response result, which is going to be an object with the success, which is a Boolean, and the message, which is a string. Okay, so now we can just say for the previous state, that type is going to be response result, and also what this function will return is a promise that will be the response result. Okay, which is going to be, again, success and message. So let's get the form data first. So we'll say const name, set that to form data.get, and we want to get by the name, which is name, and we'll say as string. And then we also want to get the email. So let's take this and this, change that to email. Then we want to get password. So this and this, password. Okay, that'll get us the form data. Then let's make sure there is all those fields. So if not name, if not email, and if not password, then let's log event, and we'll say validation error, and missing registration or register fields. Type is going to be off, and we'll send the name and email, and log level is going to be warning, and that should do it for the log event. Actually, I wanted to put this in a try catch. That's right. So let's go right here, say try catch, and then I'm just going to move this stuff. So we'll just cut that and put that into the try. All right, and then after that, we just want to return the result, which is going to be success. Wait a minute, I want to be in here. So this is going to be return success false. And let's do message all fields are required. Okay, so now outside of that if statement, I want to check if the user exists. So let's say const existing user. We're going to set that to await, and then we're going to use our Prisma client and say prisma.user dot, and then let's do find unique and pass in a where and just match the email. Okay, so we're checking for that user, and then we want to say if the user exists, so if existing user, then let's do a log, so log event, and we'll say registration failed. Registration failed. User already exists. And I want to put the email actually, so I'll use backticks here. So backticks, and then we'll put the email. Okay, and then we're going to pass the category, and I mean, I guess we don't have to put the email there. We could put it here, but I'll just put it in both places, and then we'll make that a warning. So if the user exists, that, and then we want to return, so I'll just grab this here, and we're going to return false and just change the message up to user already exists. Right, and then we want to go outside of that. So if those pass, right, if the fields are filled in and the user email matches, now we want to hash the password. So we'll say const hashed password, set that to await, and then we're going to use bcrypt dot hash pass in the plain text password and the number of rounds. So we'll do 10. And let's see, we got the hash password. Now we want to create the user. So we can do that. Let's say const user, set that to await, and then we'll take the Prisma client and user and then the create method. And we want to pass into that, it takes in data, which is going to be the name, email, password, but we want to make sure that we set the password to the hashed password. All right, so we'll do that. And the way I want this to work is after the user is registered, I want them to be logged in. So that means we're going to set and sign the token and set the cookie. So let's actually put a comment here. We'll say sign and set auth token. So we'll say const token, set that to await, and this is where we want to call our signAuthToken function that we created in our libauth file. And then we're going to pass the payload in, which is going to be the user ID, and we set that here to the user.id, okay, because we're getting the user here, we're creating it, the user gets put here, and then we're setting the ID to the user ID in the payload of the token. All right, and then we want to await and then set authCookie. Okay, so this one creates, encrypts the payload and signs the token. This one is going to set it to the cookie, so we want to pass in the token. And then we'll just go ahead and log it. So let's put backticks. We'll say user registered successfully. User registered successfully, and I'll put the email auth. Let's pass in the user ID. So it's going to be user.id, and let's pass in email, and let's make it info. Okay, and then for the return, we just want the success. Success is going to be true. And the message, we'll say registration successful. And then in the error, let's return success is going to be false, and message, we'll just say something went wrong, please try again. And we'll do a log event as well. So log event, and let's do unexpected error during registration. Okay, and that's going to have a category of auth, and then there's no data that I'm going to pass, and then error level and the error. Okay, so we have our register action, and just to kind of go through it again, we get the form data, we check the form data, we check if the user exists. If it does, we log it, and then we send a message saying they already exist. If they don't exist, we go and we hash the password, we create the user with that new hash password, the name and email, we then sign the token, create and sign the token, set it in the cookie, so we're essentially logging in, log the event, and then we return success true. So now we have to create the front end of this, the register form. So let's go to the register page. Actually, we have to create it. So in app, I'm going to create a folder. I'm going to create a folder with parentheses called auth. So this is just a group, meaning that it's not actually going to be part of the URL. It's not going to be /auth/register. It'll still just be /register if I put a folder in here called register. And again, this is for people that aren't really familiar with Next.js, but it won't be part of it. If you do want it to be part of the route and you want it to be /auth/register, then you could remove the parentheses. But the parentheses just makes it a group for organization.
So I'm going to create a file in here called page.tsx, and let's write this out. So this is going to be the register page. And just for now, we'll just say register. And then if I go and I click on the register button, now we see our register page. Okay, so we're going to bring some packages into this and some hooks. I want to use the useActionState hook like we did in the other form. And we're also going to bring in useEffect. And since we're using hooks, we're going to make this a client component, at least at the moment. And then let's also import toast, because I do want to show a toast notification. So that's going to come in from Sonar. And then also the use router hook, because we're going to want to redirect. And we want to bring in, of course, our register user action that we just created. And that's going to be from Auth actions. Okay, now since we're using useActionState, we need to pass in our initial state, and I'm going to put that into a variable, into an object called initial state. And just like with when we create a ticket, the response we're going to get is going to have a success boolean and a message string. So the initial state is going to be success, false, and then message will just be an empty string. Okay, and then we want to go ahead and use the useState hook. So that's we're going to pass in here state and then the form action and useActionState. That's going to take in the action we want to call, which is going to be register user, and then also our initial state. All right, and then let's just start to output the form before we do anything else. So for that, I think I'm just going to paste in. So let me just grab that real quick. And let's return parentheses, and then I'm going to paste that in. Save it, and that should, there we go. So we now have our register form. And just to kind of go over it real quick, we just have a div. We're using Flexbox, same as the other form. We have an H1. We have our form, which is, I have form action here, which obviously is coming from here. And then let's see, we have our input for the name. We have an input for the email and for the password, and then a button. So you can either copy this or you can grab it from the final repo. Now I want to redirect, once they log in, I want them to redirect to /tickets. And if there's an error, I want to show a toast. So what we'll do is we'll use useEffect for that. Actually, before we do that, we have to initialize our router. So let's say const router, set that to use router. And then the useEffect I'm going to put right above the return down here. So let's say useEffect, and let's pass in our function. And then as far as the dependencies go, so we want this to fire off when the state or router changes. Okay, and then in the useState, let's check for success. So if the state.success, then that means it's successful. So I'm going to show a toast.success and say registration. So registration successful. And then let's redirect. So we're going to take our router and we're going to call .push. And we want to push to /tickets. And then I just want to do a refresh. So router.refresh. Refresh. Did I bring router in from the right thing? Yeah. I think, right? Next, no, I'm sorry. This is next navigation. There we go. All right, so we want to do an else. So if it's not successful, then let's just show an error in the toast. And that's going to be toast error. And we want to show the message. So state.message. In fact, let's do else if state.message. All right, so we can try that out. Oh, let's see, we got an error going on here. Oh, yeah, this is a LastPass error. So I have the LastPass extension, which puts these these blocks in here for your past your fields or whatever. So that's it's not matching what Next.js is giving us, so it's complaining. So if you want to get rid of that, you can just disable LastPass if you have that installed. So I'm just going to find that here and just shut that off. If I reload, then that error should go away. So now we'll try it out. Let's register. I'll just put my own name here. And let's say brad@gmail. And let's put a password. Okay, so I get registration successful, and then it brings us to tickets. Now to check that, we can go to Prisma Studio. I'm just going to refresh this, and we should see under user, so it sees one user, and there it is, brad@gmail. It generates a CUID or CID, whatever it's called, hashed password. Good. So we're now able to register a user. So now what I'd like to do is show the correct links in the nav bar, right? Because I'm logged in, I shouldn't be seeing login and register. So I want to create, I guess, a helper to get the current user. And we can do that through the auth token. So let's jump into our file structure here. And I'm going to put this in let's put it in the lib folder. I'm going to create a new file, and we're going to call it current-user.ts. And then from here, we're going to import a couple things. We want to bring in the, let's bring in the verify. What did I call it? I think it's, verifyAuthToken, because that's what'll decrypt it. So verifyAuthToken, and then we want to be able to get it from the cookie, so getAuthCookie. We're bringing that in from our auth file, which is in the same folder. It's in the lib folder. And then let's also bring in the Prisma client. So I'm going to import Prisma, and remember that's going to be from the @/db/Prisma. And then let's create a type for the payload, because remember the JSON Web Token has a user ID as getting sent as the payload. So I'm just going to put that here. We'll say type, and let's call this auth payload. And we're just going to have a user ID, which is going to be a string. Okay, now we're going to export an async function, and let's call it getCurrentUser. And the way we can do this, first off, let's do a try catch. The way we can do this is get the token from the cookie. So let's say const token, set that to await, and then our getAuthCookie. And let's just say if there's no token, so if there's no token, I just want to return null. Then we want to get the payload from that token, and we can do that with the verifyAuthToken function. So let's say payload, and let's set that to, I'm going to put this in parentheses, and we're going to say await, and then verifyAuthToken, pass in the token, and I just want to add to this as the auth payload, so we're using that type. Then let's say if not payload, and I want to check for the user ID, I'm going to use optional chaining here. So if not payload user ID, we also want to return null. So if there's no token or there's no payload, or I'm sorry, no user ID in the payload, then we're going to return null. And then let's go under that, and then we want to get the user. So we'll say const user, set that to await Prisma. So we're using the Prisma client, the user model, I can't see, user model, and then let's do find unique, and we'll pass in our where, and let's say where the ID is equal to the payload dot user ID. Okay, so we're just matching the payload that's sent in the token with the ID of the user in the database. And then I don't want to get all the fields, like I don't want the password hash, obviously. So what we can do is pass in a select, and I can say I only want to select the ID. So we do ID true, and I want the email. So email true, and then the name. And that should get the user. Then we just want to return that user. So right under here, let's just return the user. Okay, now in the catch, I'm just going to do console log, and we'll just say that there's an error getting the current user. And let's also just pass the error, and then we want to just return null. So that's our get current user function. Now let's use that in the Navbar. So I'm going to close that up and then open the, let's see, components Navbar. All right, and then we'll bring that in. So let's import get current user from our current user file. And let's see, remember that returns the user, which is either going to be the user or null based on if the token is valid or not. So let's say const user, set that to await get current user. And then, and this has to be asynchronous. So let's say async. And then let's see, we're gonna go in this div right here. And what I'm gonna do is add in some curly braces, and we're gonna say if user, then show something else, show something else. And what I want to show if the user is there is going to be, first of all, these two links, right? The new ticket and the my tickets. Okay, so I'm just going to cut those. And let's go into this first one. So this is if there is a user. So I'm going to put a fragment, and then in that I'll paste the two links. Okay, and then let's grab the other ones. So we get the login, we get the register, and we get the log out, which is a form with a button. So we're going to cut those, and that's going to go in the else. So we'll put a fragment and then paste those in. And then I'll save. And now we see new ticket and my tickets. We should, the logout should go in the other one. So this logout form right here, let's just cut that. And then we're going to put that under the link for my tickets so that shows. Okay, and now if it's on smaller screens, it fits, right? So the next thing I want to do is a log out. We need to be able to log the user out, which will consist of removing the auth cookie, which we already have a function for. So let's create our logout user. That's going to be an action. So we can go into our auth actions file. And let's go down at the bottom here. We'll just say log user out and remove auth cookie. So let's say export function or async function, and we'll call this logout user. And as far as what it's going to return, let's say promise, and it's going to be that object with success and message. So we'll pass in here, I'm going to go on the next line here. Let's say success, which is going to be a Boolean. And then we have message, which will be a string. All right, so that's what we'll return. Now let's go into the function body, and we'll open up a try catch. And we want to call the removeAuthCookie. So let's await on that. So removeAuthCookie, which should be auto imported. Let's just make sure. Yep, so that was brought in from our libauth file. Okay, so we're removing that, and then I'm going to log the event to Sentry. So user logged out successfully. And again, it's up to you if you want to do logs for stuff like this. If you have a huge site and a ton of users, you probably don't. But the point is just to show you, how this works. up to you on what you want to actually log. And I missed the data, so after the, after the category is going to be the data, which in this case is just going to be an empty object. So after the log event, we just want to return our object with success is going to be true, and message will say logout successful. Now in the catch, I'm going to log event. For the message, we'll say unexpected error. We'll say unexpected error during logout. So that's going to be an auth category. And then for the data, I'm just going to attach just an empty object, error for the log level, and then pass the actual error. Okay, and then what we're going to return is going to be our object with success, which in this case is going to be false. And then we have our message, which I'll say logout failed. And we'll say, please try again. Now we want to use this in the Navbar, but we're going to be using some hooks, such as useActionState and useEffect. So I don't want to make the Navbar a client component in order to use those hooks. So what we'll do is create a component for the logout button and then bring it in. So let's go to components and let's create a new file here called logoutButton.tsx. And let's create a component called logout button. And let's see, I'm going to grab from the Navbar, I'm going to grab the form. So right here, this logout form, I'm going to just cut that. And then we're going to paste that in here. And let's just save that as is for now and bring it into the Navbar. So we'll say import logout button. And then we're going to just go to where that form just was, and we're going to add that here, logout button. And it should still just look the same. Okay, now in the logout button, we're going to make this a client component. So let's say use client. And a few things I want to bring in. We want the useActionState, because we're treating the logout form just like any other form, where it's going to hit an action that returns a success in a message. I also want to bring the useEffect so we can do the redirect. And if we're going to redirect, we need to also bring in useRouter, and it's going to be from Next Navigation, not Next Router. And let's import the action that we just created, the Logout User, and also the toast from Sonar. Toast from, nope, just toast. Okay, now we're going to initialize the router. So let's say const router. And then let's create our initial state. You don't have to put this in a variable, but I think it makes it a little cleaner. So let's say success initially is going to be false, and message initially is going to be an empty string. Then we want to use the useState hook, so that's going to be state and form action from useActionState, and that's going to take in our action that we're going to call, which is Logout User, and it's going to take in our initial state. So you should see the pattern that we're doing here for any form that deals with an action. And then on the form tag, we want to add the action attribute and set that to the form action. And then to take care of the redirect, let's create our useEffect. We'll go right above the return. So useEffect, and just like with the others, we want to look at the state and the router. Okay, then we're going to check for success. So if the state.success, so if that's true, then let's show a success message. So toast.success, and then we're going to say logout successful, and then we want to redirect. So let's take the router and call .push, and I'm going to redirect to /login. And then let's do an else or an else if and check for the state.message. Okay, so if state success is false and there's a message, we know that message is the error. So we'll say toast.error and pass in the state.message. And that's it. So I'm just going to refresh this, and we're logged in right now because I registered, which also logs you in. Click log out, and now we're logged out. It killed the cookie, and now we see login and register in the nav bar. Okay, cool. So the next thing we're going to do is the login, right? So we have this login page, which right now doesn't exist. If I go to it, we get a 404. So let's start off with, let's just get the form showing. So we'll go to our app and then our auth group and create a new folder called login. And in that, we'll create a file called page.tsx. And we'll create our component. Let's call this, we'll call it login page. And for now, I'm just going to say login just to show something. All right, and before we do this, the login page, I want to add the action. So let's go into our auth actions and go down to the bottom. We'll say log user in. So export async, call it login user. Okay, now this is going to take in the previous state. Notice on the logout, so logout we didn't pass in like prev state and form data because we didn't need it, right? When there's no form data, there's no fields that they're filling out, they just click the button. But here, login user, we're taking in data, so we need the prev state. And I'm going to set that to our response result that we have up above that we did earlier. And then form data will be set to uppercase F form data. And then what this will return is going to be a promise with the response result. And let's open up a try catch, and then in there we're going to get the fields. So we have an email that we need to get, which we can use form data dot get. The name of it will be email, and let's just say as string. And then we also want the password, so let's take this and this, change it to password. So that'll get our fields. And then I'm just going to do a quick check. So if not email or not password, then let's log event. And we'll just say validation error and missing login fields. And it's going to be the auth category. And for data, we'll send the email. And we'll make the log level a warning. And then as far as what we want to return, if we have that error, is going to be success false. And message will be email and password are required. Okay, so that's if they miss the email or password. Now, if it passes, or if they fill in the fields, then we want to get the user, right? Or we want to match the user with the email that's passed in. Okay, user in the database to email that's passed in. So let's await Prisma.user, and we'll use find unique, and we want to find where the email, right? So where email equals email, which this is the same as doing this. And then underneath that, we want to check to see if the user was found. So we'll say, or if it wasn't found, and if it wasn't, then we'll log the event. Let's say, actually I'm going to use backticks here and say login failed. We'll say user not found. And I'm just going to put the email in as well. So we'll just put a dash and then the email. Okay, and it's the auth category. I'll also pass the email in here as data, and we'll set it to warning. And then let's return, we want success false. And for the message, we'll just say invalid email. Actually, you know what? Let's check for the password as well. So if not user or not user dot password, then we'll say invalid email or password. All right, now we need to compare the plain text password to the hash password in the database, and that's where bcrypt comes in. There's a method called compare that we can do that we can use to do this. So let's create a variable called isMatch, and we'll set that to await, and then let's use bcrypt.compare. And then you want to pass in two things. You want the plain text password, which is just password, right? Because that's the up here. That's coming in from the form. And then you want to pass in the hashed password, which we can get from the user, from user.password. So that's going to be what we passed in second, is user.password. Okay, and that will give us a true or false based on if it matches. So if it doesn't match, so if not is match, then they have the wrong password. So let's just do a log event. I'll just copy this one. And let's say we'll do login failed, and we'll just change this to incorrect password, and we can make this quotes or leave it backticks. It's up to you. And then auth, and then let's see, we'll send the email warning, so that's all good. And then let's do our return, which I'm going to do the same return I did here. Okay, so after the log event, I'm going to say invalid email or password. Now, this is kind of a security thing. You don't want to let the user know that the email exists, but the password was wrong, because that tells the user if that email is an actual user of that website, of that application. So if the email matches and the password is wrong, or if there's no email and the user isn't found, you still want to say the same thing. You still want to say invalid email or password. Okay, that's why I put it in both places here. So I think it's just a security issue. You don't want people seeing like who's registered and who's not. So now after we pass, right, so we'll go under the if is not is match, then we want to get the token, or I should say create the token, which we're going to use the signAuthToken, which I think was brought in. Yeah, so we brought that in from our auth library. So signAuthToken, and that's going to take in the payload, which is going to be the user. I'm going to set user ID to user.id. Okay, so that will pass the payload in and encrypt it. And then we want to set the cookie. So let's say await and then setAuthCookie and pass in the token. All right, and then let's return from that success true, and message, we'll say login successful. And then if there's an error, let's log event, and we'll just say unexpected error during login. For the data, just be empty, and the error log level, and then pass the actual error. Okay, and then we're going to return from this success false message login. We'll just say what do I want to say? Error during login. All right, and yeah, I think that should do it. Save it. So now we have the login action. Now we need to create the actual login page. So let's do that next. Now, I don't want to make the login page client rendered, and the form has to be because it has hooks. So I think what we'll do is just create a form component for the login as well as the register. Because right now, if we look at the register page, it's client rendered. So why don't we do this? Why don't we copy everything that's in the register page, and then in addition to the page, I'm going to create form.tsx, or we could call it register-form tsx. And then I'm going to paste in the whole page and change this, and the bottom where it exports, let's change it to register form. Okay, and then what we'll do is just bring that into the page. So the register page, we can just get rid of all this, generate a new component, and call it register page like it was. And now we just want to bring in the form that I just created, so register form, and then we're just going to render that. So register form. So that way the page is server rendered, but the form is client rendered, and we should still see it no problem if I go to register. So now we'll do the same thing with the login. So let's see, close that up. So for login page, we have that, but let's create in addition, let's say login form.tsx, and then we'll create our component. Login form, and for now I'll just say form, and then we're going to bring that into the login page like we did the register. So import the login form, and then we'll just render that here. Okay, and then we should still see, we should see form. All right, so we can close up the page. Let's go back to the login form, and now we want to do a lot of the same stuff we did on the register page. So why don't we just copy or I should say the register form. So why don't we just copy that, the whole thing, and in the login form, I'll just paste that in, and then we'll change register form here and at the bottom to login form, and then just go through and change a few things like the button. We'll say login. Let's go to up to the top here. So all this will stay the same. We're still getting the same initial state. We're going to bring in login user action instead of register. And then we're going to pass in login user right here instead of register. And then let's see, here we'll say login successful. And then when we redirect, it'll still be to tickets. Let's see, this is all going to stay the same. The header here, register, we'll change that to login. And then we don't need the name field. We just want the email and password. So we'll get rid of that name field. And the form should go to form action. So I think the rest of this can stay the same. Let's go ahead and save that. And now we have our login form. All right, and it should connect. The action is set to form action, which we have the login user action pasted into or put into. So let's try it out. I'm going to try with something that doesn't exist first, like I'll do brad1@gmail.com. Okay, so invalid email or password. Now let's try brad@gmail.com. Log in. And now we get login successful. We can see the correct links in the Navbar, and we get redirected to our tickets page. Now, before we move on, I just want to take a second and look at Sentry. So I'm just going to refresh this. So these are, let's see, I'm on the issues page. And let's go to prioritize. So this is any error that was thrown. So fetch ticket list, login failed, error, the default export is not a React component. So anything in, in the process of development is going to show here. So a lot of these, like the default export, that's fixed. So we could mark that resolved. This other stuff, these are just logs, fetch ticket list. And we can just see what happened before, which is nothing really because it's just fetching the tickets. Yeah, so it's just showing me on the page. Hydration error, so that was when I had to disable LastPass. So we know that that's resolved. All these hydration, or this one here. And then next router was not mounted, so that's not exist. So all of these are taken care of. Scheduled Prisma error for testing, that was just a simulation. Yeah, so we could mark all of these as solved. And then for review, this is going to be just like regular logs. So user registers successfully, viewing ticket details. So yeah, I mean, again, you don't have to do this stuff, but it can be helpful just to see everything that happened on your site and who did it. But yeah, we can mark all these resolved. So I just wanted to just take a look at that, and then you can check out any performance. So if you want to look at, durations and page loads and the different routes, how they perform and so on, you can do that. All right, now the next thing I want to do, now that we can log in, I want to make it so that when we submit a ticket, right, if we go to new tickets, we need to attach the user to the ticket, because right now it's just going to submit a ticket and we don't know who did it, right? Who submitted it. So we have to attach the user to it. So let's open up the actions for the ticket. So ticket.actions. And let's go to the create ticket, which I believe is at the top. And you'll see this, we're getting a TypeScript error here because now the ticket is expecting a user because of the Prisma schema, right? If we look at our Prisma schema, you should have the user ID and user in here. So it's expecting that. So first thing I'm going to do is bring in at the top, I'm going to bring in the get current user, because we need to know which user is using the form. So we'll bring that in, and then let's go to the create ticket, and at the top of the try block, let's check for the user. So we'll say if, well, actually, let's, we'll just get the user first. So const user, set that equal to await get current user, and then we'll check the user. So if there's not a user, I'm going to first of all log the event, and I'll say unauthorized ticket creation attempt. And this is going to be of the type ticket. I guess it could be auth too, depends on how you look at it. And we'll make that a warning. Okay, and then what we're going to do is return success, return that as false, and then the message will say you must be logged in to create a ticket. Okay, so that's the first thing we want to do. Then when you create the ticket, we want to add the user ID. So let's go down to where we see that TypeScript error. So we have subject, description, priority. Now we're also going to add in, let's say, user, and we're going to set that to an object. And since it's a relationship, we're going to add here connect, and we want to set in the connect, we want to set the ID to the user.id. Okay, so that will connect the user to this ticket. And that should be all we have to do to connect a user to a ticket. Now, before we test that out, there's one thing I want to do. So in the logout button, I have it right now where I'm bringing in the router, and if success, then we're pushing to the login page. I don't want to do that here. What I want to do is make it so that the tickets page, right, so my tickets, if you're not logged in, it should redirect you to the login page. So let's not do this here. Let's get rid of the router.push, and we can get rid of anything to do with the router in the login button. So we don't need to pass it in here, and then we don't need to initialize it, and then we don't need to bring it in, the use router. Okay, what I do want to do though is go to the ticket page, which is source app tickets and then page.tsx, and I want to get the user, so I'm going to import get current user, and then we're going to go right above where we get the tickets, and we're going to get the user with await and then get current user, and then we're just going to do a check here on the tickets page. If not user, then we're going to use redirect from next navigation and redirect to /login. Okay, so if I'm not logged in, which I am right now, but if I'm not, this should redirect me. So let's test out adding the ticket first. So I'm going to call this Brad's ticket. I'll just say this is a sample ticket from Brad, and then let's submit that. Okay, so ticket successfully submitted, and I see Brad's ticket. And if I go to Prisma Studio and I look at the tickets, now that user is connected. You can see the user ID as well as just the entire user. If I click on it, we have the Brad at Gmail. All right, so now the problem that we still have though is anyone can see this Brad's ticket. And I'm going to log out, which you can see redirects me to the login because I can't be on that tickets page if I'm not logged in. But let's actually register a new user. So John Doe and John at Gmail. And this not only registers but also logs me in. And I'm logged in as John, but I see Brad's ticket. So obviously we don't want that. We want to limit it to that user's tickets. So we're going to do that in the actions, so the ticket actions, and go down to our get tickets. And from here, we want to get the user. So let's go right in the try here and say const user. And we want to await get current user. And then if there's not a user, then I want to, first of all, log that. So we'll log an event, and let's say unauthorized access to ticket list. And for the category, you could say auth or ticket. I'm going to say ticket just because we're in the ticket actions. And just an empty object for the data, and let's do a warning. Not a warning, but warning. And then we'll just return an empty array if there's no user, because we don't want them seeing any tickets, even though they can't get to this page anyway from the front end. Now, to limit the tickets to the user tickets, we need to go right here where we call this Prisma ticket find many, and we're going to limit it by saying where the user ID, because now the tickets have a user ID field, match it to, or it has to match the user.id. And that user is coming from the get current user, which ultimately that user ID comes from the token. So hopefully you can see the whole flow of this application. And now you'll see that it disappears because I'm logged in as John, so I can't see Brad's ticket. Now I'm going to create a new ticket as John. Let's say John's ticket. This is a sample ticket from John. And we'll do medium and submit. Now I get that submitted successfully, and I can see it on the listing page. So I'm going to go ahead and log out. Redirects me to login. Now I'm going to log in as Brad. And as you probably guessed, I see Brad's ticket and I don't see John's ticket. So now it's user specific. So our project is pretty much done. We can log in and register. So we have authentication, we can create new tickets, we can see our tickets and only our tickets. So that's kind of the gist of what I wanted to do. But we'll do a couple more things. So I want to make this its own component, the ticket item. And we can also do something with the status, like if it's closed, we can fade it out or something like that. But there's a lot of things you could add on to this project. So I would suggest that you do that. I think that that's the best way to learn, is to just jump in and start doing things yourself and getting your hands dirty. So this just gives you a good start. So let's close off or close up all this stuff, and I want to create a new component in the components folder, and we'll call this, let's call it TicketItem. And let's say SFC TicketItem, and then it's going to take in a prop of ticket. And then for the type, let's set that to, we'll say ticket, what do we want to call this? TicketItem props. And then I'll just create that right here. So type will be TicketItem props. And that's just going to be an object with a ticket. And that's going to have a type of ticket, which I can actually bring in from generated Prisma. And when I bring in type, usually I like to add import type so we know what it is. All right, now as far as what I want to put in the return, let's go to the tickets page. So app tickets page TSX. And what we have inside of this tickets.map is what I want. So this div, which ends right here, I'm going to just go ahead and cut that. And then I'm going to paste that in to the return here. Now this uses the getPriority class and a link. So those are two things we need to bring in as well. So up at the top here, let's say import link, and let's import getPriority class. All right, now this ticket item we're going to bring into the ticket page. So we no longer need this link or the getPriority class. And it looks like I'm not using log event here either, so we can get rid of that. And then we're going to bring in the ticket item, and I'm going to just add that into the map here. So ticket item, and we want to add on a key to that, which will be the ticket.id, and then the ticket itself. There we go. Let's save it, and it should just show us the same thing, except now it's a little cleaner and it's in its own component. All right, guys, so now I want to do the close ticket functionality. So if we view it, we should have a close button down here. So that means we have to create an action, and then we'll add a close ticket button component to this page here. So let's go ahead and jump into our ticket actions, and then down at the very bottom, we'll say this is going to close ticket. And we want to export an async function called close ticket. Okay, now we're going to be using the useActionState. So just like with all of our other actions, this is going to take in, actually it's not going to be an object. It's going to take in prev state, and that's going to be, as far as the type, it'll be an object with success, which will be a Boolean, and also a message, which will be a string. So that's prev state. Then we want form data, which will have a type of form data. And then as far as what it's going to return, so the function will return a promise, and that promise is going to be, again, success, which will be a Boolean, and message, which will be a string. All right, and then I'm going to get the ticket ID. So let's say ticket ID, set that to, we're going to get it from the form data. So form data.get and ticket ID, but I'm going to cast that as a number. So we're just going to wrap that in number. Once we do that, we're going to check if not ticket ID. Okay, so if there's no ticket ID, then let's just do a return success, return an object with success false, and message will be ticket ID is required. And if there is a ticket ID, then we want to get the user. So that'll be await get current user. And we'll check for the user. So if not user, then let's return success false, and message, we'll just say unauthorized. Okay, and then for both of these, we should probably do a Sentry log event. So before the return, oops. Let's see, so right here, before the return, let's say log event. And for that, we'll say ticket, or missing ticket ID, I guess we'll say, missing ticket ID, and it'll be ticket, just an object for the data, and the type will be a warning. All right, and then I'll just copy that. We'll do the same thing here. For the user, we'll say missing user ID. Yeah. So if there is a ticket and there is a user, we want to get the ticket and make sure it belongs to that user. So we get the ticket by using Prisma.ticket, and we'll use the find, let's use find unique, and we want to find where the ID of the ticket equals the ticket ID. Yeah, and then we're going to check, so if not the ticket, or if the ticket dot user ID, so this is where we check for the user, if that is not equal to the user dot ID, okay, and this user is coming from get current user, which is the logged in user, so it needs to match. So if it doesn't, then let's do log event, and we'll say unauthorized ticket close attempt. Okay, and then it's going to be the ticket category, and for the data that we send, let's send the ticket ID, and let's send the user ID, which we would set to user.id, and then we'll do warning. All right, and then as far as what we want to return, so that'll be success will be false, message, again, we'll just say this, or this is to the user, so we'll say you are not authorized to close this ticket. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's do the actual update. So we'll say await prisma.ticket.update, and we want to update where the ID of the ticket is equal to ticket ID, and then the data that we want to send. Did I do that right? This should have curly braces, and then the data that we want to send is going to be the status, and that's going to be set to closed. I think that's right. So data, set the it needs to be set to a string of closed with uppercase C. Okay, so that'll do the actual update. Then I just want to revalidate path for two paths. One is going to be for the tickets page itself, and then one is going to be for the specific ticket. So let's do backticks here, and then we'll do slash, and then ticket ID. So just to make sure that those now have the, the most recent ticket, which would be this one, setting the status. And then we'll return success true, and message will say that the ticket has closed. Ticket has closed successfully. All right, so that's our action. Now we want to use this obviously in our front end. So I'm going to create a new component for the close button. So under components, let's create a new file. We'll call this close ticket button.tsx. And this will be close ticket button. And then I just want to have a couple imports here. So we're going to be using useActionState. So that's from React. And we're going to be using useEffect. And then we want our action, of course, that we just created. So close ticket from the actions file. And then I'm also using the Sonar toast. So let's bring in toast. That's going to be from Sonar. All right, and then let's see. I'm just going to put the initial state in a variable. Actually, we can put it right here, const initial state, success false by default, and message empty. Okay, now let's say state and form action. So state and form action. We're gonna get that from useActionState, and that's gonna get passed in the actual action, which is close ticket, and then it's gonna be the initial state. Now this close ticket button, it is gonna take some props, so we should probably add those in here. So for props, it'll have the ticket ID and also is closed. And as far as the type for that, it's going to be an object with ticket ID, which is going to be a number, and the is closed, of course, is going to be a Boolean. All right, now let's create well, actually, before the return, let's just check to see if it's closed. So we'll say if it is closed, then we're just going to return null, because I don't want to show this closed ticket button if it's already closed. And then in the return, since we're using this form action here, we're going to have an actual form with a button, not just a link. So let's create our form and add the action and set that to the form action. Okay, and then in that form we'll have an input. Let's give it a type of hidden, because this is going to be the ticket ID, and we need a way to send that. It's not going to be obviously an input that the user can see, so it's going to be hidden. And let's call this ticket ID, and then the value will be the ticket ID. All right, then we're going to have our button, and I just want to give this button some classes. So class name, let's do background. We'll do background red 500. And let's do text-white, and padding X3, padding Y3, and what else? We're going to make this full, so width or W-full. We'll make rounded corners. On hover, I want to make the background a little darker, so let's say hover BG red, do 600, and also transition. And then inside the button, we'll just have close ticket. Okay, and also make sure that you add a type on this and set that to submit. So now the last thing we have to do is, once we submit it, we want to run the use effect and check for the success. If it's successful, we'll show the toast success message. If not, we'll show the error. So let's put that, we'll go right above, what do I want to put this? Yeah, we'll go right above this if is closed. And let's say use effect. And we pass in a function. And then as far as the dependencies, we just want to look at the state. So when state changes, this will run. And we're going to then check for state.success. And then let's do toast.success. And then for the message, that's going to be whatever is coming from the action, so state.message. And then let's say else if the state.message, so if it has a message but it's not successful, so state.success, then obviously that means there's an error, so we're going to toast.error and still show the state.message, which should be an error message. Okay, so now we want to use this close button, and it's going to be on the single page, which is going to be in the app folder, tickets, and then the brackets ID page. So from here, let's import the close ticket button, and then we're going to put this down at the bottom, so underneath the link. And I only want to show if the ticket is open. So let's say if the ticket.status, if it's not equal to closed, then we're going to show, let's say close ticket button, and then that's just going to take in the ticket ID. So set that to the ticket.id, and then we also want to set pass in is closed, which will set that to an expression of ticket.status equals closed. Okay, so if it's closed, that'll be true. If not, it'll be false. So now let's save that. You're importing the useActionState. Oh, so I forgot to make the client ticket button a client component, or close ticket button a client component. So we just want to do use client at the top because we are using hooks. All right, so now we should see the button. There it is, close ticket. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, and now the button goes away. Okay, so we're able to close it, and just to double check, I'm going to go to Prisma Studio and reload, and let's check out the status field, and you can see Brad's ticket, the status is closed. Now you can handle this how you want. What I'm going to do is when we list out the tickets, if it's closed, I want it to be like faded out. In fact, I'll add a new ticket just so we can see the difference. So let's say Brad's ticket 2. This is a sample ticket, and I'll make this medium, submit. Okay, so now this one's closed, right? So what I'll do is go to, where do we want to handle this? It's going to be in the ticket item component, right? So ticket item, because that's what each one of these is, a ticket item. And what we can do is go right above the return, and let's create a variable called is closed, and we'll set that to, let's say, ticket.status, and set that to close. So if it's closed, then this is closed will be true. Now we can use this to add some dynamic styles. So for instance, the div that wraps it, like I said, I want to set the opacity to 50. So in order to do that, instead of for the class name, instead of for using quotes, let's do a curly brace and then brackets, end it with, no, not curly brace and backtick, and then end it the same way. And then what we'll do is add, let's see, I'll just go on to the end here and use our template literal syntax and say if is closed, then I want to have a class of opacity -50, else then just nothing. So now if I save that and we take a look, now this is faded out, right? Because it's closed. However, I can still click the view ticket button. I don't even want to be able to do that. So let's, and it's up to you on how you want to handle this, right? Now we're getting into UX stuff, so it's really up to you. But I'm choosing to make this button gray and disabled. So we'll come down to where we have the link, and let's see, I'm gonna, for the class name, same thing, I'm gonna use curly brace, backtick, and then where it ends, instead of a quote, we'll do backtick curly brace. And I want to take this BG blue and the text white, I'm going to cut that. And then at the end here, again, we'll open up the syntax here and say if is closed, then show something, show a class, else, show something else. Now, in the something else, if it's not closed, is where I want to have that BG blue and text white, and also this hover BG blue, which I'm going to cut and put into that. Okay, now if it is closed, then I'm going to add a BG-gray-400 and text-gray-700, and then I don't want to be able to click it, and I don't want the pointer, the cursor to be a pointer. So we can use the class cursor-not-allowed, and also the pointer-events-none. So these tailwind classes will make it so that we can't click on it and it doesn't turn to the hand, to the pointer. So now I can't open this. I mean, you could still technically go to type in the URL to go to the page, but it's not a big deal. I just want something to show that the ticket is closed. Now, the last thing I want to do is this new ticket page. If I log out, I can still go to the page, which obviously we don't want that. So to fix that, we're going to go to the app folder, tickets, and then the ID folder and page TSX. And from here, we want to bring in, no, not this, this is the details page. Sorry, we want to go to new page TSX. And from here, we're going to import get current user. And then we're just going to go right above the return, const user, set that to await get current user. And then we're just going to check if not user. Okay, so if the user's not logged in, then I'm going to call redirect from next navigation, and I want to redirect to the /login. So if I save that and come back over here, now you can see I get redirected. So now I can't visit that page if I'm logged in. I mean, if I'm not logged in. And if I log in, we'll log in as John this time. Now, I go to new ticket and it works. And that's it. So hopefully you guys learned a lot from this. And just to show you what our Sentry dashboard looks like. So it just gives us a full history of everything that's happened in our project, whether it's an error, whether it's a log that we added. So you can see here we got this element type is invalid, expected string. So I mean, we were able to fix this stuff as we went along, but if it's something that you really get stuck with, then this can really help. And again, it just shows everything that happened. So unauthorized ticket access, viewing ticket details. I mean, it's up to you on what you want to log. You probably wouldn't log as much as we did, because for every user, you're probably not going to want to just like show if they viewed the ticket details, but you can, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff that we didn't get to. I just basically showed you the basics. So yeah, I mean, I would suggest taking this project and just run with it, add some more features. You could even create a whole admin area where, you could respond to the tickets and maybe add file uploading. There's just so many different features you could add and just have a really good learning experience. But I appreciate you guys sticking around, watching it, following along with me, and I'll see you in the next project.